Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to Sleep Tales. I am so glad you are here with me tonight. Find your most comfortable position in a quiet place where you will not be disturbed. Allow your body to feel heavy and supported by the surface beneath you. Let go of the day that has passed. Let go of any thoughts about tomorrow. For the next while, there is nothing for you to do and nowhere for you to be, except right here. Your only task is to listen to the sound of my voice and to let this story carry you gently towards a deep and peaceful rest. So take a slow, deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel your muscles begin to soften. Let the story begin. The story begins in a place called Port Blossom. It was a small village that sat beside the sea, tucked into a curve of the coastline like a secret. It was a place where time was not measured by clocks, but by the slow and steady breathing of the ocean. The tide would come in, and the tide would go out, and that was the rhythm of every day. Here lived a young woman named Helen. She was quiet, with eyes the color of the sea on a calm day. She lived with her father, Kale, a fisherman whose face was lined by the sun and the salt, and whose hands were thick and strong from a lifetime of pulling nets from the water. She lived with her mother, Marin, a woman with a gentle smile and hands that were always busy, mending clothes or tending to the small garden behind their cottage. And she lived with her younger brother, Finn, a boy with a restless energy who dreamed of having his own fishing boat. Helen loved her home. She loved the clean, salty smell of the air and the feeling of the sea breeze on her skin. But sometimes when she looked out at the endless water, a tiny, quiet question would form in her mind. A question about the world that existed beyond the horizon. Chapter 1. The Rhythm of the Tides. The first light in Port Blossom was not a color. It was a feeling, a slow change in the air from cool to cold, a dampness that settled on every surface, making the wooden fences slick and the stone walls weep with tiny drops of water. This was the time before the sun, when the world was painted in shades of gray and deep, dark blue. Helen was always awake for this moment. She did not need a rooster to crow or a bell to ring. Her body knew the rhythm of the village, the silent call to rise that came with the shifting tide. She would lie still in her small bed, under the heavy wool blanket her mother had woven years ago. The air in the room she shared with her brother was still and cold. Finn was a deep sleeper, a lump under his own blanket, his breathing a soft, steady whisper in the quiet. Helen would listen. First, she would hear the silence, a deep and total quiet that only existed for a few moments each day. Then, the first sound would arrive. It was the sea. It was not a loud crash of waves, but a distant, gentle sigh, the sound of the water turning over in its sleep, far out in the bay. That was the signal. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet making no sound on the smooth, worn wooden floorboards of the cottage. The floor was cold, a familiar shock that helped to wake her fully. She moved through the small main room of their home. A simple wooden table and 4 chairs stood in the center. A stone fireplace, dark and empty now, was built into one wall. The embers from last night's fire were long dead, leaving behind only the faintest scent of wood smoke in the air. She passed the small sleeping area where her parents lay. Their curtain was drawn, a thick piece of canvas that gave them a small measure of privacy. She could hear her father's low, rumbling snore, a sound as constant and comforting as the sea itself. She knew that in a few minutes, that sound would stop, and he too would rise to meet the day. Her first task was always the same. She would unlatch the cottage door, a heavy piece of wood that required a firm push of her shoulder. The latch was iron, cool and solid under her hand. The door would swing open with a low groan, a sound that was part of the village's morning song, the cold, salty air would rush in, filling the small space, chasing away the warm, sleepy air from inside. Helen would step out onto the small patch of flattened earth in front of their home. She would close her eyes for a moment and just breathe. The air of Port Blossom was a complex thing. The most powerful scent was salt, a clean, sharp smell that seemed to cling to everything. But underneath that, there were other things. The smell of wet stone and damp earth, the faint, oily scent of fish from the docks, the mineral smell of the seaweed left behind on the sand by the retreating tide. It was the smell of her entire world, and it was the first thing she welcomed each day. She would then walk to the well, which stood in a small common space between her cottage and two others. The path was worn smooth by generations of feet. Her feet knew every dip and every rise, every place where a small stone might turn under her heel. The rope of the well was thick and rough, coarse against her palms. She would lower the wooden bucket into the darkness, hearing the distant splash as it hit the water far below. Then began the slow, steady work of pulling it back up, hand over hand. The muscles in her arms and back were used to the strain. It was a simple, repetitive motion. The bucket would emerge, dripping, full of clear, cold water. She would carry it back to the cottage, the water sloshing gently with each step. She would pour the water into a large clay basin just inside the door. And this was the water they would use for drinking, for washing, for cooking. She would make a second trip, and a third, until the basin was full. It was a quiet, solitary ritual, a way to begin her day with a simple, useful act. By the time she finished, her father would be awake. Cale was a man of few words, especially in the morning. He would nod to Helen, a silent greeting that meant good morning and thank you for the water. He would splash his face with the cold water from the basin, sputtering as the chill shocked him awake. Marin would be up too, moving quietly around the fireplace, preparing for the day. She would already be coaxing a new fire to life, using dry kindling and a piece of flint. The first sparks would catch, and a tiny flame would flicker, casting a warm, dancing light on the dark stone. Soon, the smell of wood smoke would fill the cottage again, a warm and comforting scent. Helen and her father would leave the cottage together as the sky began to lighten from black to a deep, dark gray. They walked down the winding path that led to the harbor. The village was slowly waking up around them. A light would appear in the window of another cottage. A door would creak open. The low murmur of voices would begin to drift through the air. They walked past the baker's house, and though the windows were still dark, a faint, warm smell of yeast was already beginning to escape, a promise of the bread that would be ready in a few hours. They passed the small, sturdy home of the blacksmith, his workshop silent for now, the great bellows still and the forge cold. They passed the home of Old Man Hemlock, who was the oldest person in Port Blossom. His cottage was dark. He would not rise until the sun was fully in the sky, to sit on his small wooden porch and watch the world go by. The path grew wider as it neared the harbor, and the smells of the sea grew stronger. The ground beneath their feet changed from packed earth to sand mixed with crushed shells that crunched with each step. And then the harbor would come into view. It was not a grand place. It was a simple, curved stone wall that created a small area of calm water where the fishing boats were moored. There were perhaps 20 boats in total, all of them made of wood, all of them showing the signs of their hard life on the water. Their paint was faded and peeling, their wood was scarred and patched. They bobbed gently on the dark water, their masts like a forest of bare trees. The sound here was different. It was a chorus of small, gentle noises, the rhythmic creak of wood as the boats strained against their ropes, the soft, slapping sound of the water against their hulls, The lonely, mournful cry of a gull circling high overhead, its white wings catching the first hint of the dawn light. Cal's boat was named the Sea Serpent. It was not the biggest boat in the harbor, nor the newest, but it was strong and reliable. He had built it himself with his own father many years ago. Every plank, every nail was a part of his own history. Helen would stand on the stone jetty as her father prepared for the day's work. Other fishermen were there too, moving with the same slow, deliberate purpose. There was not much talk. A nod here, a quiet word there. They all knew what needed to be done. They worked together without needing to speak, a community bound by the shared challenge of the sea. Helen's job was to help her father with the nets. The nets were the most important tool a fisherman had, and they required constant care. They were piled on the jetty, great heaps of coarse, brown twine. They smelled of salt and fish and the deep water. Helen's fingers, though young and slender, were strong and nimble. She would take a section of the net and spread it out on the stone. Her eyes were sharp, trained to spot the smallest break, the slightest tear. A hole no bigger than her thumb could mean the loss of a whole day's catch. When she found a tear, she would take out her mending tools. She had a small, smooth piece of wood that she used to hold the net taut, and a needle carved from bone. The twine she used for mending was the same as the net itself. The only sounds were the scrape of the twine against the stone and the gentle rhythm of her own breathing. She would work her way through the entire pile of nets, her head bowed in concentration, while her father checked the sails, the ropes, and the small store of supplies on his boat. As she worked, the sun would begin to rise. It was a slow and beautiful event that happened every single day, but Helen never grew tired of watching it. A sliver of bright orange would appear on the horizon, far out at sea. The color would spread, painting the underside of the clouds in shades of pink and gold. The gray water of the harbor would begin to sparkle, and the dark shapes of the boats would gain color and dimension. The light would creep across the village, touching the tops of the cottages first, then slowly moving down their walls, until the whole of Port Blossom was bathed in the warm, gentle light of a new day. The gulls would become more active, their cries growing louder and more frequent. The fishermen would finish their preparations, one by one. They would untie their boats and begin to head out of the harbor. She would feel a small pang of worry, a feeling that every woman in Port Blossom knew well. The sea gave them their life, but it could also take it away. She would say a small, silent prayer for his safety, a prayer she had been saying for as long as she could remember. With the boats gone, the harbor became quiet again. The women and children of the village would now be starting their own day's work. Helen would walk back to the cottage. Her brother Finn would be up by now, eating a piece of leftover bread from the night before. He was 12 years old, with a scattering of freckles across his nose and the same restless energy as the sea on a windy day. He would already be talking about the boat he was going to build, a boat bigger and faster than any in the harbor. He would sail farther than anyone had ever sailed before, and he would come back with so much fish that the whole village would feast for a week. Helen would listen and smile. His dreams were as big as the ocean itself. Her mother, Marin, would give her a list of tasks for the day. Her work was not on the sea, but on the land. It was just as important, just as vital to their survival. Her first task was often to tend the garden. It was a small plot of land behind the cottage, protected from the worst of the salty winds by a low stone wall. Here, they grew the things that the sea could not provide: potatoes, carrots, onions, and hardy green vegetables. Helen enjoyed the garden. The smell of the damp earth was a welcome change from the salt of the harbor. She would pull weeds, her fingers working carefully around the delicate stems of the plants. The weeds were stubborn, always trying to reclaim the small patch of cultivated land. It was a constant battle, but a gentle one. She would use a small hand trowel to loosen the soil around the vegetables, allowing air and water to reach their roots. If the weather had been dry, she would water the plants, using the water she had drawn from the well that morning. She would carry it in 2 wooden buckets, balanced on a yoke across her shoulders. The work was hard on her back, but she found a rhythm in it, a slow and steady pace that was not tiring. She would search the leaves for any signs of pests, small green insects that could ruin a crop. She would pick them off one by one, her touch gentle but firm. She felt a connection to these plants, a sense of responsibility for their well-being. They were a small splash of green in a world that was mostly blue and brown and gray. They were a sign of life, of persistence. As she worked, she would listen to the sounds of the village around her, the laughter of small children playing on the beach, the rhythmic thud of a hammer from the blacksmith's workshop, now in full swing, the distant bleating of the few sheep that grazed on the sparse grass of the cliffs. The village was a living thing, and these were the sounds of its heartbeat. After the garden, there were other tasks. There was always mending to be done. The salt in the air and the rough life of the village meant that clothes wore out quickly. Helen would sit with her mother in the main room of the cottage, a pile of clothes between them. They would work in comfortable silence, their needles flashing in the light from the open door. Marin was a master at mending. She could take a shirt that was almost falling apart and make it strong again. Helen learned from her, watching her mother's skilled hands, the way she made her stitches so small and even that they were almost invisible. They would mend Finn's trousers, which always seemed to have a new tear in the knee. They would mend Kel's heavy wool shirts, worn thin at the elbows. It was not exciting work, but it was necessary. It was an act of care, of making things last. Sometimes, Marin would send Helen to the beach to gather things. She would take a large wicker basket and walk along the shoreline, her eyes scanning the sand. She would look for driftwood, pieces of wood that had been smoothed and shaped by the sea. The best pieces were dry and light, perfect for starting the fire. She would look for certain types of seaweed, the dark green and purple kinds that Marin would add to their stews to give them a salty, rich flavor. She would also look for shells, not the big, fancy ones, but the small, ordinary ones. Marin would crush them into a fine powder and mix it into the soil of the garden to give the plants the minerals they needed. The beach was Helen's favorite place. It was a place of constant change. Every tide brought new treasures and took away the old ones. She loved the feeling of the wet sand under her bare feet, the way it squished between her toes. She loved the sound of the waves, a constant soothing rhythm that seemed to wash away all her thoughts. She would walk for a long time, following the curve of the bay. The beach near the village was wide and sandy, but as she walked farther, the coastline became more rugged. Great gray rocks rose from the sand, covered in barnacles and seaweed. Small pools of water were left behind by the tide, tiny worlds filled with little crabs and fish and anemones. Helen would crouch by these tide pools and watch the life within them. She felt a kinship with these small, resilient creatures living their lives in the space between the land and the sea. She would often lose track of time on the beach, lost in her own quiet observations. The sun would climb higher in the sky, and the sea would change color from green to a deep, brilliant blue. It was on these walks that her mind would wander the most. She would look at the horizon, a perfectly straight line where the blue of the sea met the blue of Deski. It seemed so close, yet it was impossibly far away. She wondered what was on the other side. Her father had told her stories of other ports, other towns, but they were just words to her. She could not imagine a place that did not smell of salt, a place where the main sound was not the call of the gulls. The thought was both exciting and a little frightening. It was a feeling she kept to herself, a small, secret seed of curiosity planted deep inside her. In the afternoon, she would often visit Mira, the baker's wife. The bakery was a small, warm building that always smelled wonderful. The air inside was thick with the scent of baking bread, a smell that was sweet and yeasty and comforting. Myra was a large, cheerful woman with a kind face and arms that were always dusted with flour. She was a friend of Marin's, and she had known Helen since she was a baby. Helen would often bring Mira a few fish that her father had set aside from the previous day's catch. In return, Mira would give her a loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. The crust would be dark and crispy, the inside soft and fluffy. Helen loved to hold the warm loaf against her chest as she walked home. It felt like holding a piece of the sun. Myra would ask about her family, and Helen would ask about hers. Their conversations were simple, about the weather, about the fishing, about the small events of village life. It was a simple, comfortable friendship, part of the fabric of her day. She might also see Old Man Hemlock. By the afternoon, he would be sitting on his porch, a pipe in his hand, a thin stream of sweet-smelling smoke rising into the air. He had been a fisherman like her father, but a storm had taken his boat and his strength many years ago. Now he was the village storyteller. The children of Port Blossom would often gather at his feet, their eyes wide as he told them tales of the sea. He told stories of giant squid with eyes as big as dinner plates, and of ghost ships that sailed on moonless nights. He told stories of mermaids who sang songs that could lure a sailor to his doom. Helen was too old to sit at his feet with the children, but she would sometimes pause on her way past his cottage and listen. She knew his stories were not entirely true, that they had grown bigger and more fantastic with each telling, but she loved them anyway. They gave the sea a sense of magic, of mystery. They made the world feel bigger, more full of wonder. As the day began to draw to a close, a sense of anticipation would begin to build in the village. The women would finish their work and begin to watch the horizon. They would stand on the jetties or at the doors of their cottages, their eyes scanning the sea for the first sight of the returning boats. It was a quiet, anxious time. The sun would begin its slow descent, painting the sky with fiery colors once again. The wind would often die down, and the sea would become calm and glassy. And then the first speck would appear. A shout would go up, a cry of relief and welcome. One by one, the fishing boats would return, their sails dark against the setting sun. They would glide into the harbor, their work for the day done. Helen would be there, waiting for her father. The smell of fish was strong, a smell of success, of a day's hard work rewarded. The bottom of the boat would be filled with silver-scaled fish of all sizes, their eyes glassy, their bodies still cool from the deep water. Finn would be there too, his eyes shining with excitement. This was his favorite part of the day. He would help to unload the fish, carrying them in large baskets, from the boat to the cleaning tables on the shore. The work of cleaning the fish was messy and smelly, but it was a communal affair. The women of the village would work together, their knives flashing in the fading light. They would gut and scale the fish with practiced efficiency, their conversation a low, happy buzz. Some of the fish would be set aside for their own families, for the evening meal. The rest would be salted and laid out on large wooden racks to dry. The salted fish would last for many months, providing food during the winter when the fishing was poor. It was their wealth, their security, the result of their partnership with the sea. Helen would work alongside her mother, her hands becoming cold and wet. She did not mind the work. There was a satisfaction in it, in seeing the bounty of the sea being prepared to sustain them. When the work was done and the harbor was quiet once more, they would walk home together as a family. Cale would be tired, his movements slow, but he would have a look of contentment on his face. He would put his heavy arm around Helen's shoulders, and she would lean against him, feeling the solid strength of his body. Maren would carry the basket with their dinner, and Finn would run ahead, already boasting about the size of the fish they had caught. Their cottage would be warm and welcoming. The fire Maren had started that morning would now be a bed of glowing red embers, casting a soft, warm light around the room. The smell of wood smoke and the sea would mingle with the new smell of cooking fish. Their evening meal was a simple but satisfying affair. They would sit around the wooden table, the four of them, and eat the fish that Kale had caught and that Maren had cooked. She would make a simple stew with potatoes and onions from their garden, flavored with the seaweed Helen had gathered. They would eat with their hands, using pieces of the bread from Myra's bakery to soak up the broth. They would talk about their day. Kale would speak of the wind and the currents. Maren would talk about the garden. Finn would retell the story of the biggest fish, making it a little bigger with each telling. Helen would listen, feeling a deep sense of peace. This was her family. This was her home. This was the rhythm of her life. It was a good life, a life of purpose and connection. She was loved and she was needed. After the meal, as darkness fell outside, Kale would mend his nets by the light of the fire, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he worked the needle. Maren would spin wool into yarn, the wheel humming a soft, sleepy song. Finn would carve a small piece of driftwood, trying to shape it into a boat. And Helen would sit and watch the fire, her mind quiet. She would feel the warmth on her face and listen to the comfortable, familiar sounds of her family. She loved this life. She loved its simplicity, its predictability. She loved the feeling of being part of something, part of a family, part of a village. But even in these moments of perfect contentment, her eyes would sometimes drift to the small window, to the patch of black night outside. And she would see the stars, cold and distant, and she would think of the vast, dark ocean that stretched out beyond their little harbor. And the quiet question would return, a whisper on the edge of her hearing. What else was there? What was beyond the curve of the earth? The feeling was not one of sadness or of unhappiness. It was just a quiet, persistent curiosity, a gentle pull towards the unknown, a feeling as steady and as constant as the rhythm of the tides. Chapter 2. A Whisper on the Wind. The days in Port Blossom continued their slow, steady march, one after another, each one much like the one before. The sun rose, the boats went out, the nets were mended, the gardens were tended, the sun set, the boats came home. It was a chain of days, strong and unbroken. The summer sun, which had been high and hot, began to lower itself in the sky just a little bit each day. The air in the mornings and evenings took on a new coolness, a crisp edge that hinted at the autumn to come. The sea, too, began to change its mood. The gentle, glassy calmness of the summer months was replaced by a more restless energy. Small, white-crested waves would appear even on clear days, and the wind would carry a stronger, colder taste of salt. The rhythm of the village remained the same, but the tune it played was becoming a little deeper, a little more serious. Helen felt the change in the air and in the water. It was a familiar shift, one she had known her entire life. It was the world turning, as it always did. She continued her daily tasks with the same quiet diligence. We pulled the last of the hardy beans from the garden, her fingers stained with green. She helped her mother store the potatoes and onions in the cool, dark space beneath the cottage floor, preparing for the lean months ahead. She mended her father's nets, her bone needle flying as the wind grew colder on the stone jetty. Her life was a circle, and she walked its path every day without question. Then, one afternoon, something different happened. A small boy named Leo, who was supposed to be watching his family's sheep on the high cliffs south of the village, came running down the path. He was shouting, his face red with effort, his words tumbling over one another. He had seen something. On the long, winding dirt track that led to Port Blossom, the track that was almost always empty, he had seen a cloud of dust. It was far away, a tiny brown smudge against the green of the hills, but it was moving. It was moving towards them. News like this traveled faster than wind in Port Blossom. The work of the village came to a slow halt. Women came to the doors of their cottages, wiping their hands on their aprons, their faces filled with curiosity. The blacksmith's hammer fell silent. The men who were on shore, mending their boats or carving new oars, put down their tools. They all looked towards the southern path. A traveler was a rare thing. Sometimes a fisherman from another village, blown off course, would seek shelter in their harbor. But a traveler from the land, from the world beyond the coastal hills, was an event that might happen only once a year, or even less. Helen was on the beach, her basket half full of driftwood, when she heard the commotion. She heard the change in the village's sound, the usual hum of activity replaced by a focused, expectant silence, punctuated by hushed voices. She left her basket on the sand and walked back up the path towards the central part of the village. She saw the people gathered, all looking in the same direction. She stood at the edge of the small crowd, her quiet nature keeping her from pushing to the front. She looked where they were looking. At first, she saw nothing but the familiar green and brown of the landscape. But then, she saw it too. A small puff of dust, rising and falling, growing ever so slowly larger. It was real. Someone was coming. The wait was long. Time seemed to stretch and slow down. The sun beat down on their heads, and the wind blew strands of hair across their faces. The children grew restless, shifting from foot to foot, asking questions their parents could not answer. The adults were more patient, their faces showing a mixture of caution and intrigue. A stranger could mean many things. They could bring news, or trade, or trouble. The people of Port Blossom were wary of the outside world, a place they knew only from stories. Helen felt a quiet thrum of excitement in her chest. It was different from the nervous energy of the others. It was a pure, simple curiosity. The same feeling she had when she looked out at the horizon. But this time, the unknown was not far away. It was walking right towards her. Slowly, the dust cloud took shape. They could see the dark forms of two animals, and behind them, the larger shape of a cart. It was a merchant. The tension in the air eased, replaced by a low murmur of interest. A merchant meant goods, things they could not make or grow themselves. It meant a brief connection to that other world. The cart drew closer, moving at the steady, plodding pace of the animals that pulled it. They could begin to hear the sounds now. The low, rhythmic creak of the large wooden wheels turning on their axles. The soft jingle of a bell tied to the harness of one of the animals. The quiet, weary breathing of the beasts themselves. The cart finally rolled into the open space in the center of the village, near the well where Helen began every day. It came to a halt with a final, long groan of wood and leather. The man driving the cart set the brake, a heavy wooden lever. He climbed down from his seat, his movements slow and a little stiff, like a man who had been sitting for a very long time. The two animals that pulled the cart were not horses, but mules. They were strong, sturdy creatures with long ears and patient eyes. Their brown coats were caked with a thick layer of dust, a testament to a long journey. They lowered their heads and stood perfectly still, grateful for the rest. The man himself was as weathered as his cart. He was not old, but his face was tanned a deep brown by the sun, and there were fine lines around his eyes. He wore a dusty, wide-brimmed hat to shade his face. His clothes were made of leather and thick, sturdy cloth, practical for a life on the road. He was not big like the fishermen of the village, who were broad in the shoulder and thick in the arm. He was lean and wiry, built for endurance rather than raw strength. He took off his hat, revealing a head of dark hair, and wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. His eyes moved over the crowd of villagers, taking everything in. They were sharp, intelligent eyes. He gave a small, polite nod to the assembled people. "Good day to you," he said. His voice was not loud, but it was clear and carried icily in the quiet air. "My name is Silas. I am a traveling merchant." Cale, Helen's father, stepped forward. As one of the more respected fishermen, he often acted as a spokesman for the village. "You are welcome in Port Blossom," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have traveled far." "That I have," Silas replied, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "The roads are long." The villagers began to relax. The man's manner was calm and respectful. He was not a threat. The children, who had been hiding behind their mother's skirts, began to creep forward, their curiosity getting the better of their shyness. They stared at the strange mules and the huge, mysterious cart. The cart itself was a marvel. It was made of dark, heavy wood, scarred and nicked from its travels. The wheels were taller than the village children, bound with iron to make them strong. A thick canvas sheet, the color of sand, was stretched over a wooden frame, protecting the contents from the sun and rain. The canvas was patched in several places, each patch a story of a past tier, a past journey. The whole thing seemed to exude a sense of distance, of roads and towns that Helen could not even imagine. Silas gave his mules a drink of water from the well, using his own leather bucket. He patted their necks, speaking to them in a low, gentle voice. Then he turned to the cart. "I have goods," he announced to the crowd. "Perhaps you will find something you have a need for." He walked to the back of the cart and began to untie the ropes that held the canvas flap in place. His fingers were nimble and sure, loosening the knots with practiced ease. He rolled up the heavy canvas, and a collective gasp went through the small crowd. The inside of the cart was a treasure cave. It was packed to the brim with things the likes of which most of the villagers had never seen before. Helen moved a little closer, her eyes wide. She saw tools. There were knives with blades that shone like silver, so bright they reflected the afternoon sun. Their own knives were made of dull, dark iron, hammered into shape by the village blacksmith. These looked sharper, lighter, more deadly. There were metal needles, thin and elegant, unlike the thicker bone needles they all used for mending. There were small, clever-looking tools with gears and hinges, their purpose a complete mystery. Next to the tools were sacks and small leather pouches. Silas opened one of the sacks, and a rich, dark smell filled the air. It was the smell of earth, but a different kind of earth, a warmer, richer earth than their own. "These are beans for drinking," he said, holding up a handful of small, dark, roasted beans. "From the south, they give you energy." The villagers murmured among themselves. The idea of drinking beans was a strange one. He opened another pouch, and a sweet, woody scent wafted out. "Cinnamon," he said, from a land across the sea. He opened another, releasing a sharp, pungent aroma. "Pepper." He continued to open the small pouches, each one releasing a new and exotic smell into the salty air of Port Blossom. It was an assault on the senses, a catalogue of places far, far away. Helen breathed it all in. The smells were like a map of the world she did not know. Then he brought out the cloth. He began to unroll bolts of fabric, draping them over the side of his cart. The villagers gasped again. They were used to the colors of their own world. The gray of the stone, the brown of the earth, the blue of the sea. the dull, natural colors of their own homespun wool. But these cloths were a riot of color. There was a red as bright as a poppy flower. There was a yellow as cheerful as the summer sun. There was a green as deep as the moss in the forest. And there was a blue so rich and vibrant it made the sky look pale. The women of the village crept forward, their hands reaching out tentatively to touch the fabrics. They were smoother than their own wool, softer to the touch. Helen watched her mother, Maren, as she reached out a hand to touch the bolt of deep blue cloth. Maren's hands were rough and chapped from her work, but her touch on the fabric was gentle, almost reverent. A look of wonder was on her face. She had never felt anything so fine. Silas saw the look on Maren's face. He smiled. "But I have something even finer." He turned back to his cart and reached into a special compartment, a small wooden box that was clearly more carefully protected than the rest of his wares. He took out a small flat package wrapped in plain linen. He unwrapped it slowly, with a sense of drama. The villagers leaned in, holding their breath. Inside the linen was a small, folded square of fabric. As Silas unfolded it, it seemed to catch the light and hold it. It was a piece of cloth, but it was unlike anything Helen had ever seen or imagined. The color was a blue so deep and luminous it was like looking into the heart of the ocean at midnight. It was not a flat color. It seemed to shimmer and change as the light hit it. And woven into the blue were threads of pure, shining silver, creating a delicate pattern that looked like moonlight dancing on the surface of the water. It was the most beautiful thing Helen had ever seen. "What is it?" Maren whispered, her voice full of awe. "This," said Silas, holding it up for all to see, "is silk. And this work is from the great city of Helen could not take her eyes off the silk. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Silas held it out, and Maren, after a moment's hesitation, reached out and touched it. Her eyes went wide. Helen watched. Helen stepped forward and touched the silk with the tip of one finger. The sensation was a shock. It was smoother than the smoothest stone on the beach, softer than the petals of the rarest flower, cooler than the water of the deepest well. It felt like touching liquid light. All the textures of her life, this was a different world of feeling. "In the city," Silas said, his voice taking on a new, more animated tone, "they have workshops filled with weavers. They are not just workers, they are artists. They sit at looms as big as a small boat, and with threads of every color imaginable, they create beauty. They weave patterns of flowers, of animals, of stories. They can weave cloth so fine you can see through it, or tapestries so rich they can cover the entire wall of a castle. A woman with skilled hands and a patient heart can make a good living there, a great living. They are respected. Their work is sought after by the richest people in the land." He was speaking to the crowd, but Helen felt as if he were speaking only to her. She looked down at her own hands. They were capable hands. They were strong from pulling the well rope, nimble from mending the nets, patient from weeding the garden. But she had always seen them as tools for doing necessary work. She had never thought of them as tools for creating beauty. The idea was like a spark landing on dry tinder. The image of the silk, the feeling of it on her fingertip, was burned into her mind. The thought of creating something so wonderful, so full of light and color, with her own two hands, was a revelation. It was as if a door had opened in a wall she never even knew was there. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur for Helen. The villagers traded with Silas. They did not have much coin, so they traded with what they had. Kale gave him a large quantity of dried, salted fish, a treasure of the sea that would be valuable in the inland towns. In return, he received 2 of the sharp, shining steel knives. Marin traded a pile of neatly mended clothes and a basket of her heartiest potatoes for a small bag of the sweet-smelling cinnamon and a handful of the precious metal needles. Other families made similar trades. The baker gave bread for a bag of the roasted beans. The blacksmith traded a set of new iron hooks for a small, clever hand drill. It was a good day for Port Blossom. Everyone was happy with their new possessions. Helen did not participate in the trading. She stood back, watching, but her mind was elsewhere. It was full of the image of the blue silk and the words of the merchant, weavers, artists Solara. The name of the city was a new sound in her ears, a sound full of promise and mystery. She tried to imagine it. Silas had started to talk about it, painting pictures with his words as the villagers inspected his goods. He spoke of buildings made of pale stone that rose so high you had to crane your neck to see their tops, buildings that seemed to touch the clouds themselves. He described markets that were not just a small gathering of people, but a sprawling, chaotic river of humanity that flowed through the streets, a place where you could buy anything you could ever dream of. He told them of streets that were not dark and silent at night, but were lined with special lamps, lamps that held a bright, steady flame inside a glass cage, casting a golden glow that chased all the shadows away. To the other villagers, these were just stories, like Old Man Hemlock's tales of sea monsters. They were fantastic and unbelievable, something to be listened to and then forgotten. But to Helen, they felt real. She could almost see the tall buildings, almost hear the roar of the market, almost feel the warmth of the magic lamps. The city of Solara was no longer just a name. It was a picture forming in her mind, a place of wonder and light. That evening, the village was full of a low, happy buzz. In their cottages, people were examining their new things. Kale was testing the edge of his new knife on a piece of wood, marveling at how easily it sliced through the grain. Marin was holding one of the new needles up to the firelight, admiring its smoothness, but Helen was quiet. She sat by the fire, just as she did every night, but she was not watching the flames. She was seeing the shimmering blue silk. The next morning, Silas the merchant prepared to leave. He loaded the fish and other goods he had traded for into his cart, packing them carefully. He watered his mules one last time and hitched them to the harness. The whole village came out to see him off. He was a link to the outside, and his departure felt significant. He nodded to them all, put on his hat, and climbed onto his seat. With a click of his tongue and a gentle shake of the reins, the cart began to move, its wheels groaning as they began the long journey back the way they had come. Helen watched until the cart was just a small shape in the distance, and then until the dust cloud it raised was all that was left, and then until that too had settled, and the path was empty once more. The village returned to its rhythms. The men went to their boats. The women went to their tasks. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer started up again. Everything was as it had been before. But for Helen, everything had changed. The world felt bigger now. Her own small world of Port Blossom, which had once been her everything, now felt small. It was still beautiful, still her home, but it was no longer the whole world. There was a somewhere else, and in that somewhere else, people made beautiful things. A new idea began to grow in her mind. It was a small, quiet idea at first, almost too bold to even think, but it would not go away. What if she could learn to do that? What if she could learn to weave? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. It would mean leaving Port Blossom. It would mean leaving her family, the sea, everything she had ever known. It would mean going to the great, noisy, frightening city of Solara. But the pull of the idea was strong as the tide. She started a secret collection. She found a large, beautiful clamshell, one with a pearly iridescent inside. She hid it under a loose floorboard in the corner of the room she shared with Finn. Whenever she came across a coin, or earned a small one for doing an extra task for a neighbor, she would not give it to her mother for the family pot. She would slip it into her own hand, and, when no one was looking, she would drop it into the clamshell. The clink of the coin against the shell was a secret, satisfying sound. Her collection grew very, very slowly. A single coin 1 week, nothing for the next 2. Then 2 small coins at once. It was a tiny treasure, a hoard of hope. After a few weeks, when she had gathered a small handful of coins, she tried to speak to her parents. She chose a quiet evening after the meal was done. She took a deep breath. "The merchant Silas," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He spoke of weavers in the city. Cale looked up from the net he was mending. He grunted, not really listening. "Fairy tales for children," he said, his attention already back on the knot in his hands. The city was not a real place to him, it was a story. Marin, however, looked at Helen, and she saw the serious expression on her daughter's face. "What about them, dear?" she asked, her voice gentle. He said, "A person could learn the craft," Helen said, her heart beating fast. "He said they make beautiful things with thread, like the blue cloth." Marin's face grew worried. The beautiful cloth was one thing, but the city was another. The city, in all the stories she had ever heard, was a dangerous place. It was full of thieves and sickness, and people who would take advantage of a simple girl from a small village. "Solara is no place for you, Helen," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Your life is here, with us. You are safe here." "But I could learn," Helen insisted, a little more strongly. "I could make things. I could help." The merchant said a weaver can earn a good living. Cale looked up again, a frown on his face this time. "Your help is needed here," he said, his voice gruff. "Your mother needs you. I need you. The nets do not mend themselves. This is your life, the sea, the village. Do not fill your head with foolish dreams from a traveling salesman. He is gone. Forget his words." Helen fell silent. She saw the fear in her mother's eyes and the stern dismissal in her father's. They did not understand. How could they? They had not felt the silk. They had not seen the door open in their minds. Their love for her was a strong rope, holding her tight, keeping her safe. But right now, it felt like it was holding her back. She did not argue anymore. She knew it would be useless, but the idea did not die. Their words did not put out the spark. Instead, they were like a wind that made it burn brighter, hotter, in the secret corners of her heart. She would have to be more patient. She would have to be more determined. The whisper that had come on the wind with the merchant's cart was now a steady, quiet voice inside her, and it was telling her to wait, to watch, and to be ready. The journey had not yet begun, but in her mind, she had already taken the first step. Chapter 3: The Journey Begins. The whisper on the wind did not fade. After Silas the merchant left Port Blossom, his cart disappearing over the green hills, a change settled deep inside Helen. It was not a visible change. She did not speak of it again to her parents. She saw the fear it had placed in their hearts, and she loved them too much to cause them that pain day after day. So she buried the words, but she could not bury the feeling. The seed of the city, of the weaver's loom, had not been washed away by her parents' concerns. Instead, their words were like the soil packed down on top of a seed, and in the darkness and the quiet, it began to sprout. Her life continued its familiar rhythm, but her actions were now infused with a new, quiet purpose. She woke before the sun, as she always had, and fetched the water from the well. But now she did it with a focused energy, as if she were proving something to herself, to the world. She carried the buckets without pausing for rest, her muscles straining, but her will was stronger than the ache in her arms. When she mended her father's nets on the cold stone jetty, her fingers moved faster than ever before. Her eyes, already sharp, became even more so. She did not just look for tears. She looked for weaknesses, for single threads that were beginning to wear thin. She would reinforce these weak spots before they could break, her bone needle weaving a pattern of strength and foresight into the rough twine. Her father noticed. He did not say anything, but he saw that his nets were stronger than they had ever been, that they came back from the sea with fewer and smaller tears. He would watch her sometimes from his boat as he made his own preparations, a strange, unreadable expression on his weathered face. She did not speak of weaving, but she began to weave. She had no loom, no fine silk or colored yarn, so she used what she had. She would gather the long, tough grasses that grew at the edge of the beach, the ones that bent in the wind but did not break. She would sit for hours in the quiet moments of the afternoon and practice with these simple green blades. Her first attempts were clumsy. The grasses were stiff and unwilling to bend to her will. They would snap and unravel, but she was patient. The same patience she used to untangle a hopelessly knotted fishing line, she now applied to the grass. Slowly, her fingers learned the rhythm of it, the simple over and under, over and under. She wove a small, rough mat, no bigger than her hand. It was uneven and ugly, but it was a start. Her mother, Maren, found the little mat tucked away by Helen's sleeping pallet. She picked it up, her heart filled with a familiar ache of worry. She knew what it was. It was a sign that the idea of the city had not left her daughter's mind. She did not throw it away. She simply placed it back where she had found it, and she watched Helen with sad, knowing eyes. Helen's skills grew. She moved from grass to reeds gathered from the small freshwater stream that trickled down from the hills. The reeds were more pliable, and she learned to weave them into small, tight baskets. They were not as strong as the wicker baskets the village used, but they held their shape. She gave one to Finn, and he kept his small collection of special pebbles in it. He thought it was wonderful. He did not see it as a sign of her wanting to leave. He just saw it as something new and interesting his sister had made. The seasons began to turn. The cool edge of autumn sharpened into the real cold of winter. The sea turned from blue to a hard, steely gray. The winds grew stronger, howling around the corners of the cottages at night. The fishing boats went out less often. The days were short and dark, and the village drew in on itself, a small community huddled together against the cold. The evenings were long, spent by the warmth of the fire. In these long, quiet hours, Helen's determination grew stronger. The world outside the cottage was dark and cold and loud with the storm. But inside, in her mind, the image of Solara was a warm, bright light. The thought of the weaver's workshop was a quiet, peaceful room, a shelter from the storm. One evening, as a fierce winter wind rattled the wooden shutter on the window, Maren watched her daughter. Helen was not weaving with grass or reeds. She had found a small piece of driftwood, and with her father's sharp new knife, she was carefully, painstakingly, trying to carve a tiny shuttle, like the one she imagined the weavers would use. Her head was bowed in concentration, her face illuminated by the firelight, her expression one of complete focus. She was not just a girl with a passing fancy. Maren saw that now. This was a deep, true calling in her daughter's heart. To deny it would be like telling the tide not to turn. Maren looked at Cale. He was watching too, his face grim. He saw it as well. He saw the same stubborn persistence in Helen that he saw in himself when he sailed his boat into a hard wind. It was a part of him that lived in her. He had always been proud of her quiet strength, but now that strength was pointed in a direction he could not understand, a direction that led away from him, away from the safety of the village. Later that night, when Helen was asleep, Maren spoke to Kale. They sat in the near darkness. The fire burned down to glowing embers. "We cannot hold her here," Maren said, her voice soft but full of a sad certainty. "It is not a foolish dream. It is a part of her now." Kale did not answer for a long time. He stared into the dying fire. The wind howled outside. He thought of the sea. He knew he could not command the sea. He could only learn its ways and respect its power. He was beginning to understand that he could not command his daughter's heart either. To try would be to break it. "The city is a dangerous place," he said, his voice a low growl of fear. "Our daughter is strong," Maren replied, "and she is smart. We have taught her well. We have to trust her. We have to trust that the world is not as bad as the stories say." And so a silent agreement was made, not with joy, but with a heavy, reluctant acceptance born of deep love. They would not stand in her way. They would wait. They knew the merchant, Silas, had said he would return in the spring, or perhaps the summer. If he came, and if Helen still wished to go, they would let her. The winter passed, each day a little longer, a little brighter than the one before. The ice on the edges of the stream melted. The first green shoots appeared in the garden, and with the spring came a new feeling in the air of the cottage. It was a feeling of waiting. Helen could feel it. She knew her parents had changed their minds, though no words were spoken. She showed her gratitude by working even harder, by being even more gentle and attentive to her mother, by taking on more of her father's tasks to ease the burden on his aging body. The summer came, and with it, the warm sun and the calm seas. And one day, just as before, the cry went up. The dust cloud was on the southern track. Silas was returning. This time, there was no surprise, no great commotion. For Helen's family, it felt inevitable, like the arrival of the tide. The morning of her departure was quiet and gray. A soft mist hung over the village, muffling all sounds. Helen was already awake, of course. She had not slept much at all. She had packed her things the night before. It did not take long. She had so little to take. One spare dress, made of the same coarse, brown wool as the one she wore, her bone needle for mending, the small, clumsy mat she had first woven from grass, and the clamshell, heavy now, with the small collection of coins she had saved. She wrapped the shell in a piece of cloth and tucked it deep inside her small bundle. Maren came to her as she was tying the bundle. She did not say anything. She simply held out her hand. In her palm was a small object. Helen looked down. It was a bird, carved from a piece of smooth, pale driftwood. The carving was simple, but beautiful. It was a gull, its wings outstretched as if in flight. The wood was worn smooth, and it felt warm in Helen's hand. She knew her mother must have spent many of the long winter evenings carving it, a secret act of love and letting go. "So you will always remember the sound of home," Maren said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Helen closed her fingers around the wooden gull. It felt solid, real, a piece of port blossom she could hold in her hand. Kale came to her next. He looked awkward and sad. He did not know what to say. He was a man of action, not words. He held out a small leather pouch. It was old and stained with salt. Helen took it. It was surprisingly heavy. She opened the drawstring and looked inside. It was full of coins, not just her own small savings, but many more. Silver coins and a few small gold ones. It was the family's entire savings, the money they had put aside for a new boat, or for a bad winter, or for an emergency. It was a fortune. It was everything. "The world runs on this," he said, his voice gruff to hide his emotion. "Do not be a fool with it." It was the closest he could come to saying, "Take care of yourself. I love you." Helen understood. The weight of the pouch in her hand was more than the weight of the metal. It was the weight of her family's trust, their sacrifice, their hope for her. It was a heavier weight than she had ever felt before. She put the pouch in her bundle, next to the wooden gull. They walked with her to the merchant's cart. Finn was crying openly, holding onto her hand, not wanting to let go. "You will come back?" he asked, his voice small. "I will come back," she promised, kneeling down to hug him tightly. The whole village seemed to be there, standing in the mist in small, quiet groups. They did not understand why she was leaving. Their world was safe and known. Why would anyone want to leave it? But they were her people, and so they came to say goodbye. Old Man Hemlock gave her a solemn nod. Mira the baker pressed a warm loaf of bread into her hands. They did not offer words of encouragement, but their presence was a kind of silent blessing. Silas the merchant was waiting patiently by his cart. He had already spoken with Kale and Marin. He understood the situation. He helped her place her small bundle in a secure spot in the cart, and then helped her up onto the hard wooden seat beside him. It was high off the ground. From here she could see over the heads of the villagers, over the roofs of the cottages, to the gray sea beyond. Marin stood with her hand over her mouth, her face pale. Kale stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his face like a stone carving. Helen looked at them, her heart aching with a love so strong it was almost painful. She wanted to jump down, to run back to them, to tell them she had changed her mind. But the quiet voice inside her, the voice that had been her companion for so long, told her to stay. Silas clicked his tongue. The mules leaned into their harnesses. The great wheels of the cart began to turn with a low, mournful groan. The journey began. The cart moved slowly through the village. She passed the well, she passed the blacksmith's shop. She passed her own cottage, small and sturdy, with the smoke from the morning fire rising from its chimney. She watched as the faces of her family and friends grew smaller and smaller, their features blurring in the mist. The path began to climb, leaving the village behind in the hollow by the sea. Helen did not wave. She just watched. She kept her eyes fixed on her home until the cart turned a bend in the path, and the village of Port Blossom was gone. The first sound to disappear was the sound of the people. The next sound to fade was the cry of the gulls. The last sound, the one that clung on the longest, was the low, rhythmic sigh of the ocean. It had been the soundtrack to her entire life, a sound so constant she often did not even notice it. But now, as it faded, its absence was a huge, empty silence. The silence was filled by new sounds. The creak and groan of the cart, the jingle of the harness, the soft thud of the mule's hooves on the dirt track. This was the music of her new life. For the first day, they traveled along the coast. The path rose and fell, following the curves of the land. To her right, she could still see the sea. It was a familiar comfort, a great expanse of gray-green water stretching to the horizon. The air still smelled of salt. The plants by the side of the track were the same hardy, wind-beaten plants she had known all her life. She was moving, she was on her way, but she was not yet in a truly new world. She sat straight and still on the seat, her hands clutching the wooden gull in her pocket. Silas did not speak to her much. He let the silence sit between them, giving her time to say her long goodbye to the world she was leaving behind. That night, they made camp in a small, sheltered cove. Silas built a small, efficient fire. Helen ate the bread Mira had given her. It tasted of home. She looked up at the sky. It was the same sky she had always known, filled with the same familiar patterns of stars. But for the first time, she was not looking at it from her cottage window. She was out in the open, with nothing but the sky above her. The sound of the waves crashing on the beach below was a comfort, a lullaby she had known forever. She wrapped herself in a thick wool blanket that Silas gave her and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The next day, the path turned inland. This was the real change. The sea disappeared behind a line of high, grassy hills. The smell of salt faded, replaced by a new smell, the smell of damp earth and green, growing things. The air felt different in her lungs, thicker, less sharp. Helen felt a small pang of panic. The sea had been her constant companion, the one great, unchanging thing in her life. Now it was gone. She felt adrift, untethered. She gripped the wooden gull in her pocket, so tightly her knuckles turned white. They traveled through the green hills for days. The landscape was beautiful, but it was a strange, alien beauty to Helen. The world was so green. In Port Blossom, the dominant colors were blue and gray and brown. Here, there were 1,000 shades of green, from the pale new grass to the dark, rich green of the low bushes. The hills rolled on and on, like a great, green ocean. The sky seemed bigger, more vast, without the sea to meet it at the horizon. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the grass and the distant, lonely bleating of sheep. Silas began to talk a little more now. He was a man who knew the land as well as Cale knew the sea. He would point to a bird circling high above them. "That is a hawk," he would say. "It hunts for mice in the grass." He would point to a small purple flower growing by the side of the track. "That is thistle. The roots are good to eat, if you are hungry enough." He was not teaching her like a master teaches a student. He was just sharing his knowledge, speaking his thoughts aloud. Helen listened to every word. She learned the names of trees, oak with its gnarled branches, and birch with its pale, papery bark. She learned the names of birds and flowers. Her world was expanding with every new name, every new piece of information. The nights in the hills were different too. The silence was profound. There was no sound of the sea, no gentle creak of boats in the harbor. There was only the whisper of the wind and the occasional far-off cry of a night animal. Helen would lie on her back, wrapped in her blanket, and stare up at the endless field of stars. She felt very, very small. She was just one tiny person in a world that was so much bigger than she had ever imagined. She would think of her family sleeping in their cottage by the sea, and a wave of loneliness would wash over her. But then she would think of the city, of the weavers, of the shimmering blue silk, and her resolve would harden again. After the hills came the forest. The change was sudden. One moment they were in the open, rolling green land, and the next they were surrounded by trees. The trees were enormous, far taller than any she had ever seen. They grew so close together that their branches intertwined high above, creating a thick, green roof. The bright sunlight was gone, replaced by a dim, green-tinted twilight. The air became cool and still, and it smelled of damp earth, of rotting leaves, and of the sharp, clean scent of pine. The forest was a little frightening. The world had shrunk. She could no longer see for miles in every direction. The snap of a twig in the undergrowth, the rustle of leaves as some unseen creature moved past, the sudden piercing call of a bird she did not recognize. It was a world full of hidden life. Silas was at ease in the forest. He seemed to know its ways. He would point to tracks in the soft earth of the path. "A deer passed this way this morning," he would say. He showed her which mushrooms were safe to eat and which were poisonous. He showed her how to find clean water bubbling up from a spring at the base of a moss-covered rock. Helen learned to be quiet, to watch, to listen. She began to see the beauty in the forest, in the way the light filtered down through the leaves, creating moving patterns on the ground. She saw the bright red of a small patch of berries growing on a bush, a splash of vibrant color in the green and brown world. She saw the intricate, delicate patterns of a spider's web strung between two ferns, glistening with tiny drops of dew. They traveled through the forest for what felt like a very long time. The days were all the same, a slow journey through the green twilight. The nights were darker than anything Helen had ever known. Under the thick canopy of trees, there was no moonlight, no starlight. The darkness was total, a thick black velvet that pressed in from all sides. The campfire was a small, brave island of light and warmth in a vast, dark ocean. Silas would tell stories by the fire, not grand tales of sea monsters, but simple stories about the towns he visited, about the people he met. He told her about a baker who made bread in the shape of animals, and about a blacksmith who could sing while he worked his forge. Finally, one afternoon, the trees began to thin. More and more light began to filter through. And then they were out of the forest. The sudden bright sunlight made Helen blink. They were in a new kind of landscape. The land was flat. It was not wild like the hills or the forest. It was a landscape that had been tamed by human hands. It was a patchwork of huge, rectangular fields. Some fields were green with new crops. Some were brown, the earth freshly plowed in neat, straight lines. Here and there a small farmhouse stood, with a thin plume of smoke rising from its chimney. The food grown here was to feed the thousands of people who lived in Solara. The journey was almost over. Helen could feel a new kind of energy in the air. The track was wider here, and more well-worn. They began to see other people. A farmer driving a cart pulled by a slow, heavy ox. A woman walking with a basket of eggs. They would nod to Silas as they passed. The world was becoming more populated, more busy. The journey had changed Helen. She was still the same quiet person she had always been, but her eyes were different. They had seen more. Her mind was different. It held more knowledge, more understanding of the world. She had left her home as a girl from a small fishing village. She was arriving at the edge of the city as a traveler, a person who had crossed hills and forests and fields. She had learned the language of the land, the names of the trees, the signs of the animals. She was no longer just a child of the sea. She was a child of the wider world. She held the wooden gull in her pocket. It still felt like home, but it no longer felt like the only home. She was ready. She was ready for the city. As the sun began to set, Silas pointed to the horizon. "Look there," he said, and far in the distance, she saw it. A dark line against the orange sky, a line that was not straight and natural like the horizon of the sea, but jagged and uneven. It was the skyline of Solara. Chapter 4. The City of 1,000 Lights. The jagged line on the horizon grew slowly, painfully slowly. For an entire day, it was just a dark smudge against the sky, a promise of something immense that never seemed to get any closer. The cart rolled on, its wheels grinding on a road that was becoming wider and smoother. The dirt track had given way to a road made of hard-packed earth and gravel, a surface that was clearly maintained. They started to see stone markers by the side of the road, simple carved pillars that told Helen nothing, but which Silas seemed to read like a map. The traffic increased. At first, it was just another cart once in a while, or a lone rider on a horse. But soon they were rarely alone. They were part of a slow but steady stream of people, all moving in the same direction, towards the jagged line. Carts loaded with vegetables, with firewood, with barrels of ale. Farmers herding a few noisy pigs, small groups of men walking with tools on their shoulders. The world was becoming busier, more purposeful. A new sound began to reach them. It was not a distinct sound, but a low, continuous rumble, so faint that at first Helen thought it was thunder far away, but the sky was clear and blue. The sound was not in the sky. It was coming from the ground, from the direction of the city. It was a vibration she could feel in her bones, a deep hum that spoke of thousands of lives and thousands of movements all happening at once. By the late afternoon of the next day, the jagged line was no longer a line. It was a wall. Helen had never conceived of such a thing. In Port Blossom, the only walls were the low stone fences that marked the edge of a garden, walls no higher than her waist. This was something else entirely. It was a monstrous thing of stone, a cliff made by human hands. It rose straight up from the flat land, so high that she had to crane her neck back to see the top. The stone was a patchwork of gray and brown, stained with age and weather. High up on the wall, she could see tiny figures walking back and forth. They were guards, watching over the city and the lands around it. The wall seemed to stretch for miles in either direction, a great stone arm wrapping around the city, holding it in. It was a statement of power, of separation. It said, "This is the city, and that is the world. You do not simply walk in, you must enter." And then she saw the gate. It was a huge, dark opening in the massive wall, like the mouth of a giant. The gate itself was made of two immense doors of dark, thick wood, bound with wide straps of black iron. The doors were open, pushed back into the thickness of the wall, but Helen could imagine them closed, a solid barrier that nothing could pass. On either side of the gate stood guard towers, even taller than the wall, with narrow slits for windows. More guards stood at the entrance, wearing leather armor and holding long spears. They looked stern and serious, their eyes constantly moving, watching everyone who approached. The stream of people and carts funneled towards this single opening. The pace slowed to a crawl. The rumble she had heard from miles away was now a definite loud noise, a wave of sound pouring out of the city gate. Silas brought the mules to a slow walk, falling into line. Helen's heart began to beat faster. This was it. She clutched the edge of the wooden seat, her knuckles white. There was a brief exchange of words. A coin was passed, and the cart was waved through. Then it was their turn. A guard with a thick beard and tired eyes looked up at Silas. He glanced at the contents of the cart, then his eyes fell on Helen. She froze under his gaze. It was not an unkind look, just a professional, assessing one. In Port Blossom, every look had a history behind it. She knew what Kel's frown meant, what Mira's smile meant. This man's face was a blank page. He explained that he was a merchant, returning to the city. He gestured to Helen. "My passenger," he said simply. "From the coast, she seeks work." The guard's eyes flickered over Helen again, a brief, uninterested glance. He seemed satisfied. He nodded, and Silas urged the mules forward. The cart rolled under the dark stone arch of the gateway. For a few seconds, they were in shadow, the air cool and damp, and then they were through. They were inside the city of The world exploded. The first thing that hit her was the noise. It was not just a sound. It was a physical force, a wall of noise that struck her with an almost solid impact. She flinched, her whole body tensing up. It was 1,000 times louder than the loudest storm she had ever heard in Port Blossom. It was a chaotic soup of sound, with no rhythm, no pattern. At the bottom of it all was the constant, deep rumble, the sound of the city's heart beating. On top of that was the sharp, hard clatter of iron-rimmed wheels and horseshoes on a surface she had never seen before. The streets were not made of dirt or sand. They were paved with large, uneven gray stones. The sounds echoed and bounced off the tall buildings on either side, trapped in the narrow space, amplified until they were deafening. And then there were the voices. It was not the gentle murmur of the villagers talking in the evening. It was a roar. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people, all talking at once. Vendors shouting, trying to sell their wares. Their voices were harsh and loud, cutting through the general din. Men yelling at their horses, children squealing and laughing as they chased each other through the crowd. Two men were standing on a corner, arguing loudly, their faces red with anger. A woman was singing, her voice thin and reedy, trying to earn a coin. Every person was a source of noise, and all the noises crashed together into one overwhelming tidal wave of sound. Helen felt a desperate urge to cover her ears, to block it all out, but she was frozen, her hands gripping the seat. This was the sound of the city. It was the sound of too many people, too many lives, all crammed into one place. Then her eyes tried to make sense of what they were seeing, and the shock only deepened. The street they were on was wider than any path in her village, but it felt terribly narrow because of the buildings that lined it. They were giants made of stone and wood, rising up on both sides, so tall that they blocked out most of the sky. All she could see of the sky was a narrow blue ribbon, far, far above. Others were dark with grime, their wooden timbers black with age. There were windows everywhere, hundreds of them, dark rectangles staring down at the street like empty eyes. She felt exposed, watched by 1,000 unseen faces, and the people. Her mind could not comprehend the number of them. The street was a river of humanity, a dense, churning mass of bodies. They moved with a speed and a purpose that was bewildering. Everyone was walking fast, their eyes fixed ahead, pushing past each other without a word. There were men in fine clothes of bright colors, their faces proud and impatient. In Port Blossom, she knew every single person, every face, every name. Here, every face was a stranger. She was completely, utterly anonymous. The feeling was terrifying. She was a ghost, a nobody. If she were to fall, she felt as if the river of people would simply flow over her, without ever noticing she was there. Then came the smells. The clean, salty air of her home was a distant memory, a lost world. The air in Solara was thick, heavy, and full of 1,000 competing odors. It was a stew of smells, one that changed with every step. The first thing she noticed was the warm, wonderful smell of baking bread coming from a shop with an open door. But that smell was immediately swallowed up by the sharp, pungent smell of horse manure, which was everywhere on the stone streets. Then a woman in a fine dress pushed past, and a cloud of sweet, heavy perfume washed over Helen, a smell so strong it made her head spin. A moment later, that was gone, replaced by the bitter, acrid smell of coal smoke, drifting down from the countless chimneys that dotted the rooftops. There was the smell of frying meat from a man cooking on a small cart, the smell of rotting vegetables piled in a gutter, the metallic temps of the blacksmith's forge, the sour smell of spilled ale from a tavern door. It was the smell of life and death, of food and waste, of wealth and poverty, all mixed together in the close, trapped air. Helen felt a wave of nausea. She had to force herself to breathe, to take in this thick, foul, and sometimes wonderful air. Silas seemed immune to it all. He navigated the chaos with a calm, practiced skill. He called out to the mules, his voice steady, and they plodded forward, unbothered by the noise and the crowds. Helen sat beside him, small and silent, a statue of terrified wonder. She felt like a person who had lived their entire life in a single, quiet room and had suddenly been pushed out into the middle of a raging battle. Her senses were under attack. Her mind struggled to process the flood of information. It was too much, too loud, too bright, too crowded. They turned off the wide main street into a slightly narrower one. The noise lessened just a little. The crowd was thinner here. The shops were smaller. Silas pointed with his chin. "That is the weavers' district. Over there," he said, his voice loud enough to be heard over the noise. "We will find you a place to stay first." You need a quiet corner to put your thoughts in order. Helen nodded, though she barely heard him. The Weaver's district, it was here. Somewhere in this chaos was the reason she had come. The thought was both a comfort and another source of fear. How could she ever find one small workshop in this giant, confusing place? They wound their way through a maze of streets. Each street had its own character. One was full of butcher's shops, the air thick with the smell of raw meat. Another was lined with shops selling leather goods, the smell of tanned hides sharp and distinct. Silas seemed to know every turn. Finally, he guided the mules onto a much quieter street. It was narrow, and the buildings were just as tall, but there were fewer people here. The roar of the city was now a more distant rumble. It was a residential street. She could see laundry hanging from lines strung between windows high above. Silas stopped the cart in front of a tall, narrow building that looked cleaner than most. It was made of dark wood and plaster, and there were small boxes on the windowsills filled with surprisingly cheerful red flowers. It looked like a small island of order in a sea of chaos. Silas helped her down from the cart. Her legs felt weak and unsteady, as if she had been on a boat in a rough sea. He took her small bundle from the back of the cart and led her to the front door. He knocked, a firm, solid sound. After a moment, the door opened. A woman stood there. She was older, perhaps the same age as Helen's mother, but she seemed much older in spirit. She was dressed in a simple, severe dress of dark gray cloth. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly from her face. She was not smiling. Her expression was neutral, her face lined with the cares of a long life. Her eyes, however, were sharp and intelligent. They looked at Silas, then they moved to Helen, taking in her simple wool dress, her wind-tousled hair, her wide, frightened eyes. "Anya," Silas said with a respectful nod, "I have brought you a new boarder." The woman, Anya, looked at Helen for a long moment. She did not speak. Helen felt as if she were being weighed and measured. Finally, Anya gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "She looks like she will be quiet," she said. Her voice was low and businesslike. "That is the first rule. No noise." She opened the door wider to let them in. The roar of the city was instantly muffled, reduced to a low hum. The air smelled of beeswax and dried herbs. A narrow wooden staircase went straight up, disappearing into the shadows above. Silas explained Helen's situation in a few simple words. He told Anya that Helen had come to the city to seek an apprenticeship with the Weavers, and that she had the means to pay for her room. He took a few coins from his own pouch and gave them to Anya. For the first week, he said, to get her settled. He then turned to Helen and handed her her bundle. "The rest is up to you now," he said, his voice kind. "Be careful, be smart. The city does not forgive foolishness." He gave her a final nod, said his goodbyes to Anya, and left. The heavy front door closed behind him with a solid click. He was gone. Her last link to the world she knew was gone. She was alone with this stern, silent woman in this strange, quiet house. A wave of panic rose in her throat. Anya seemed to sense it. "The room is on the 4th floor, she said, her voice not unkind. "Come." She turned and began to climb the stairs. Helen followed, her feet heavy. The stairs were narrow and steep, winding upwards. They passed several closed doors on each floor. The house was completely silent. It was hard to believe they were in the middle of the noisy city. Finally, they reached the top floor. Anya stopped in front of a small wooden door and opened it. "This is it," she said. Helen stepped inside. The room was tiny. It was smaller than the space she had shared with Finn back home. There was a narrow bed against one wall, with a thin mattress and a single gray blanket. There was a small wooden chest at the foot of the bed for her things, Next to the door was a small stand with a clay pitcher and a matching basin, and that was all. The walls were plain plaster, and the wooden floor was bare, but scrubbed so clean it shone faintly in the dim light. There was one small window set high in the wall. "Water is from the pump in the courtyard. Once a day," Anya said, her voice a list of instructions. "No guests, no noise after dark. You pay at the start of each week. If you are late, you are out." She looked at Helen, her gaze firm. "Do you understand?" Helen found her voice. It came out as a small whisper. "Yes." Anya nodded once, then she left, closing the door behind her. The sound of the latch clicking into place was loud in the silence. And then she was alone. Completely and utterly alone. It was an artificial silence, a small pocket of quiet carved out of a world of noise. She could still hear the city, but it was a muffled, distant beast, a low rumble that came through the floorboards, a faint shout that drifted through the high window. She slowly walked to the window and stood on her toes to look out. She could not see the street. All she could see was the grimy stone wall of the building next door, so close she felt she could almost reach out and touch it. High above, she could see a small, rectangular patch of sky. She slid her bundle onto the narrow bed. Her hands were shaking slightly. She sat down, the mattress rustling beneath her. She felt overwhelmed, lost, and terribly lonely. She reached into her bundle, and her fingers found the familiar, smooth shape of the wooden gull. She pulled it out and held it in her palm. It felt warm, solid, a piece of her father's love, a piece of home. She held it tightly, and a single hot tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cheek. She thought of her mother, her father, her brother. They were a world away. They were in a place of open sky and salty air, a place where everyone knew her name. Here, she was nothing, a speck of dust in a giant machine. What had she done? Had she made a terrible mistake? She stayed in that room for the rest of the day and all through the night. She did not leave. She ate the last of the bread from Mira, each bite a taste of a life she had left behind. She drank the water from the pitcher. She opened the heavy leather pouch her father had given her and poured the coins out onto the bed. They made a soft, clinking sound. The sight of them, the weight of them, was a small comfort. It was a tool, a means of survival. It was her family's belief in her, made real and solid. She counted the coins carefully and put them back in the pouch, hiding it at the very bottom of the small wooden chest. She lay on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling as the light from the small patch of sky faded from gray to black. She did not sleep. She just listened to the strange, muffled heartbeat of the city around her. The next morning, she knew she could not hide forever. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her determination was still there, a small, stubborn ember. She had not come all this way to give up. She washed her face with the cold water in the basin. She smoothed her hair and her dress. She took a deep breath, unlocked her door, and walked out of the guest house. To learn, to not get lost. She turned right out of the guest house door and just started walking. She stayed close to the walls of the buildings, letting the main current of the crowd flow past her in the middle of the street. She kept her head down, but her eyes were constantly moving, taking everything in. A man standing on a box, shouting about the gods. A woman with a monkey on a leash, the monkey collecting coins in a little cup. A shop that sold nothing but books, their leather covers visible through the window. She had never seen a book before. She saw a fountain in a small square, with water pouring from the mouth of a carved stone lion. Children were splashing their hands in the cool water. It was a small moment of joy in the middle of the chaos. She felt the anonymity she had feared. But she also began to feel something else, freedom, in Port Blossom. She could not walk from her cottage to the beach without seeing a dozen people she knew. Her every move was noted, commented on, woven into the fabric of the village life. Here, no one cared where she was going. No one looked at her. She was invisible, and in that invisibility, there was a strange, thrilling power. She could go anywhere, look at anything. She was an observer unseen. When she felt she was getting too far from the guest houses, she would turn around and retrace her steps, memorizing landmarks. The fountain with the lion, a tavern with a bright red door, a bakery with a sign shaped like a loaf of bread. She was building a map in her head, a small map of a few familiar streets in a vast unknown territory. The next day, she did the same thing, but she walked in a different direction. She found the river she had heard about. It was not a beautiful, clear stream like the one near her home. It was wide and slow-moving, the water a murky brown. Large, flat-bottomed barges moved up and down the river, pushed along by men with long poles. Bridges of stone and wood crossed the river, and they were just as crowded as the streets. She stood on one of the bridges for a long time, watching the life of the river, another layer to the city's complexity. Every day, she explored. She felt the fear, the constant low-level anxiety of being in this huge, alien place. She missed the open sky and the sound of the sea with an ache that was physical. But alongside the fear was a growing sense of excitement. The city was terrifying, but it was also endlessly interesting. Around every corner was something new, something she had never seen before. A shop selling colorful glass bottles, a man painting a picture on a large piece of canvas, a building with a great clock on its face, its hands slowly moving. The city was a living, breathing creature, and she was slowly learning its rhythms, its smells, its sounds. She was no longer a frightened girl who had just arrived. She was a resident. She had a room. She had a key. She had a small, growing map in her head. The terror was still there, but now it was mixed with a powerful, vibrant thrill. She had survived the first wave. She was ready to begin. Chapter 5. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of everything, like the constant rumble of the city itself. But now it was joined by a quiet impatience. She had not left her home, her family, her entire world, just to walk the stone streets and watch life from the edges. She had come for a reason. The image of the blue and silver silk, which had been a distant, beautiful dream, now became a call to action. It was time. It was time to find the weavers. She had her first piece of information from Silas. The Weavers' District. It was a name, a place on the map of her mind that she had not yet dared to visit. One morning, she woke with a new resolve. Today was the day. She dressed in her simple wool dress, the same one she wore every day, but today she took extra care to smooth it out. She braided her hair tightly so it would not be in her way. She put the pouch with her family's future deep in her pocket, its weight a familiar, heavy reminder of her purpose. She left the quiet guest house and stepped out into the morning clamor of the city. Instead of turning left or right into the familiar territories she had already explored, she walked straight ahead into a part of the city she did not know. She asked for directions only once. She found a baker pulling hot loaves from an oven built into the side of a building. He was a busy man, his face flushed from the heat, but he was not unkind. "The Weavers' District?" she asked, her voice small. He wiped his floury hands on his apron and pointed with his chin down a long, curving street. "Follow the colored water," he said, and then turned back to his work. But as she walked, she began to notice a change in the gutters that ran alongside the stone street. In most parts of the city, the water in the gutters was a murky, foul-smelling brown. But here, she began to see strange streaks of color. A sudden, shocking splash of bright blue, swirling for a moment before it faded. A long, thin ribbon of deep red, clinging to the edge of the stones. A murky green that smelled sharp and chemical. She was on the right path. This was the trail left by the dye makers, the first step in the creation of beauty. The smell of the air changed too. The general city smell of smoke and waste was still there, but it was now mixed with new, powerful scents. There was the sharp, almost sour smell of the dyes, the smell of vinegar and strange minerals. Underneath that, there was a heavy, organic smell, the scent of wet wool, a smell that reminded her a little of the sheep on the cliffs at home, but stronger, more concentrated. There was also the oily scent of machinery, a metallic smell that spoke of moving parts that needed to be kept smooth. The sounds changed as well. The general roar of the city began to be replaced by a different kind of noise. It was a rhythmic sound, a steady, constant beat. It was a sound made of 1,000 smaller sounds, all working together. A low, rhythmic thudding, a sound she could feel in the soles of her feet. A faster, sharper, clacking noise, a soft, continuous worry. It was the sound of industry, the sound of hundreds of people all working at the same craft. It was the sound of the looms. The shops began to change. The butchers and bakers and candle makers were gone. Now the shops had bolts of cloth in their windows, great rolls of vibrant color. There were shops selling nothing but yarn, with skeins of every color imaginable hanging from the ceiling like strange, soft fruit. She saw carts passing by, piled high not with vegetables, but with huge, fluffy bales of raw wool and cotton. She had reached the heart of the textile district. It was a city within a city, a place dedicated to a single purpose, turning simple fiber into fabric. She walked for a long time, just observing, taking it all in. This was the world she had dreamed of, but it was also overwhelming, just like the rest of the city. There were so many workshops, so many signs with names carved into them. How could she possibly choose? How would she know where to go? She remembered the name Silas had mentioned, a name that had stuck in her mind like a burr. Madame Isolde. He had called her a master weaver. Helen decided that was the only place to start. She would start at the top. She began to look for the name. She walked slowly up one street and down another, her eyes scanning the carved wooden signs that hung above the doors. She saw many names: Master Theron's Fine Woolens, the Gilded Shuttle, the Brothers Clothiers. Each workshop was a hive of activity. Through the open doorways, she could see glimpses of the huge wooden machines, the looms, and the focused figures of the women who worked them. The sight made her heart beat with a mixture of excitement and pure terror. Finally, she found it. It was on a street that was a little quieter than the main thoroughfares. The workshop was not the largest or the most decorated. The sign that hung above the door was simple, made of dark, aged wood. In elegant but unadorned letters, it said simply, Isolde Weaver. There was no madame, no master, just the name. The building itself was old, its timbers dark with age, its plaster clean but cracked in places. But there was an air of seriousness about it, of quiet confidence. It did not need to shout. It knew its own worth. Helen stood across the narrow street for a long time, just looking at the door. Her feet felt as if they were rooted to the stone street. This was the door from her dreams. Behind this door lay the next step of her journey. But to take that step, she had to walk across the street and open it. It seemed like the longest, most difficult journey she had ever had to make. All the fears she had felt since leaving home gathered in her stomach, a cold, heavy knot. Who was she to walk into such a place? A simple girl from a fishing village, with hands that smelled of salt and fish, not of fine yarn. They would laugh at her. They would turn her away. She was an imposter, she closed her eyes. She took a slow, deep breath. She thought of the long journey, the creaking cart, the dark forest. She thought of her father's tired hands giving her the heavy pouch of coins. She thought of her mother's sad eyes and the small wooden goal in her pocket. She had not come all this way to be defeated by a wooden door. She opened her eyes. The fear was still there, but her resolve was a little bit stronger. She took one step, then another, and she walked across the street. Her hand trembled as she reached for the iron latch on the door. It was cold and heavy. She pushed the door open. It swung inward with a soft, well-oiled whisper, not the groan of the cottage door back home. She stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind her, closing out the world of the street. She found herself in a large, long room. The air inside was still and warm, filled with the smells she had noticed outside, but now they were richer, more distinct. The scent of wool and lanolin was the strongest, a warm animal smell. Then there was the sharp, clean smell of linen and the faint, sweet smell of raw silk. The sound was the same rhythmic clatter she had heard from the street, but in here it was softer, more intimate. It was the sound of work, focused and uninterrupted. The light was what surprised her most. The front of the workshop had large windows, bigger than any she had ever seen, letting in a flood of natural light. The light fell across the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and highlighting the incredible scene before her. The room was filled with looms. They were magnificent, terrifying machines. They were far bigger than she had imagined, taller than a man and as wide as a small boat. They were made of a dark, smooth wood, polished by years of use. They were incredibly complex, a forest of wooden beams, gears, pedals, and frames. And stretched upon these frames were thousands upon thousands of threads. The threads were the warp, the foundation of the cloth, and they stretched taut from the back of the loom to the front, a shimmering curtain of color. And at each loom sat a woman. They were all completely absorbed in their work. They sat on simple wooden benches, their bodies leaning forward in concentration. Their feet worked the pedals on the floor, causing different parts of the loom to rise and fall, creating a gap in the warp threads. Their hands were a blur of motion. In one hand, they held a shuttle, a smooth, boat-shaped piece of wood that held the weft thread. Then they would pull a heavy bar, the beater, towards them, and with a solid thud, it would press the new thread tightly against the one before it. Then their feet would move again, the warp threads would shift, and the shuttle would fly back the other way. Clack, thud, clack, thud. It was a steady, hypnotic rhythm, the heartbeat of the workshop. The women themselves seemed like part of the machines. Their faces showed no emotion, only deep focus. Their eyes were fixed on the growing cloth in front of them. Helen watched, mesmerized. She was witnessing the creation of beauty, but it was not a light, joyful process. It was hard, repetitive, disciplined work. It was a craft that demanded the complete attention of the body and the mind. No one looked up. No one noticed she was there. She was an intruder in a sacred space. She stood by the door, unsure what to do, for what felt like a very long time. Finally, a voice cut through the rhythmic sounds. "Can I help you?" The voice was sharp, clear, and full of authority. It did not come from one of the weavers at the looms. It came from the back of the workshop. A woman had been sitting at a tall desk in the corner, a place Helen had not even noticed. Now she was standing. She walked towards Helen, her steps silent on the wooden floor. This had to be Madame Is. She was an older woman, her hair a startling white, pinned up in a neat, severe style. She was tall and slender, her posture as straight as one of the beams on her looms. She wore a dress of a deep, dark purple cloth, so fine that it seemed to drink the light. The dress was simple in its cut, but the quality of the fabric was undeniable. It was a statement of her skill. Her face was a network of fine lines, a map of a long life of hard work and deep thought. But it was her eyes that held Helen captive. They were a pale, clear gray, like the sky on a winter morning, and they were sharp. They missed nothing. As she approached, her eyes swept over Helen, from her rough homemade shoes to her plain wool dress to her wind-chapped hands. It was a look that saw everything and seemed to approve of nothing. Helen's voice was trapped in her throat. She could not speak. "This is a workshop, not a marketplace," the woman said, her voice cool and impatient. "If you wish to buy cloth, there are shops for that. We do not sell to the public here." She had a way of speaking that was very precise, each word clean and sharp. Helen finally found her voice. It was a small, shaky whisper. I did not come to buy." Madame Isolde raised a thin, white eyebrow. "No. Then what do you want?" "I came to learn," Helen said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I want to be a weaver. I want to learn how to do this." She made a small, helpless gesture towards the magnificent looms. A flicker of something crossed Madame Isolde's face. It was not surprise. It was more like weary amusement. She had heard this before. "You want to be a weaver?" she repeated, her voice flat. "And what do you know of weaving?" I mend my father's fishing nets," Helen said, feeling foolish as soon as the words were out. Fishing nets. How could she compare that to this? "Fishing nets," Madame Isolde said, and this time there was a definite, cold smile on her lips. "I am sure that is very useful work, but it has nothing to do with this. This is an art. It requires years of training, a lifetime of dedication. It requires a feel for the thread, an eye for color, a mind for patterns. It is not something a girl from the coast can simply walk in and learn." Her words were not cruel, but they were dismissive. Final. She had assessed Helen and found her wanting. "I can work hard," Helen insisted, her voice gaining a tiny bit of strength. "Patience is the bare minimum," Madame Isolde said, her tone sharp again. "It is not a special skill. It is a requirement, like breathing. I do not have the time to train a girl with no background, no connections, no innate talent. I have a business to run. Now, if you will excuse me," she turned, ready to walk back to her desk, the conversation over. Panic seized Helen. This was it. This was the moment of failure. She could not let it end like this. "Please," she said, the word a desperate plea. "I will do anything. I will sweep the floors. I will clean the looms. I will carry the yarn. I ask for no pay. Just let me be here. Let me watch. Let me learn by being near the work." Madame Isolde stopped. She turned back slowly. She looked at Helen again, and this time her gaze was different. It was less dismissive, more curious. She saw the desperation in Helen's eyes, but she also saw something else, a stubbornness, a refusal to be sent away. It was a quality she recognized. It was a quality she possessed herself. Her eyes scanned the workshop, and they came to rest on something in the corner. "You want to work?" she said, her voice thoughtful. She walked over to a large basket that sat on the floor, and she gestured for Helen to follow. Helen walked over, her heart pounding. The basket was full of yarn, but it was not in neat skeins. It was a disaster. It was a massive, hopeless tangle of threads of all different colors and thicknesses. Reds, blues, greens, yellows, all knotted together in one giant chaotic ball. It looked like a painter's nightmare. There were fine silk threads tangled with thick, coarse wool. There were delicate linen threads hopelessly knotted around strands of shimmering silver. It was a mountain of chaos. "This," Madame Isolde said, her voice dry, "was an accident. A clumsy apprentice dropped a tray of bobbins. We have been picking at it for days." The younger girls have tried, they have only made it worse. Their impatience has tightened the knots. It is a waste. Expensive silk, good wool, all of it ruined, fit only for the fire. She looked from the tangled mess to Helen. You say you are patient, she said, her gray eyes locking onto Helen's. Show me. It was a test that was designed to be impossible. Helen looked at the massive knot. It was far worse than any tangled fishing net she had ever seen. A fishing net was one continuous line. This was hundreds of separate lines, all fighting with each other. Her first instinct was to say that it could not be done, but she knew that was the wrong answer. This was her one and only chance. I will try, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Madame Isolde nodded once. Very well, she said. You may use that corner. Do not disturb my weavers. She turned and walked back to her desk without another word, her purple dress flowing silently behind her. The matter was closed. She had given the strange girl an impossible task to keep her busy until she grew tired and left on her own. Helen looked at the giant basket. It was almost as tall as her waist. She took a deep breath. She dragged the heavy basket to the empty corner Madame Isolde had indicated. She sat down on the hard wooden floor, tucking her feet under her. She did not immediately plunge her hands into the mess. She did what her father had taught her to do when faced with a seemingly impossible tangle in his nets. First, you look. You do not act. You observe. She spent the first hour just looking at the knot. She let her eyes trace the paths of the different threads. She saw how a thick strand of red wool was strangling a delicate loop of blue silk. She saw how a fine silver thread had wrapped itself a dozen times around a clump of green linen. She did not see it as one big problem. She began to see it as 100 small problems, all connected. The key was to find the first problem, the one that could be solved. The workshop continued its rhythmic work around her. Clack, thud, a world of tangled yarn. After a long time of just looking, she reached into the basket. Her hands were slow, gentle. She did not grab or pull. She just rested her hands on the top of the tangled mass. She closed her eyes and just felt the threads. She could feel the different textures, the slight roughness of the wool, the smooth, cool slide of the silk, the crisp, dry feel of the linen. She was learning the knot with her fingers. Then she began. She did not try to pull a whole thread free. That was impossible. She looked for a single, small, loose loop. She found one, a loop of yellow wool. It was caught on another thread, but it had a little bit of slack. She took the very end of the yellow thread between her thumb and forefinger. Very, very gently, she began to ease it backwards. She did not pull. She just wiggled it, coaxing it, persuading it. For a long time, nothing happened. The thread was stubborn. Her fingers began to cramp, but she did not stop. She kept up the gentle, patient pressure, and then she felt it. A tiny give. The knot had loosened just a fraction. A small sigh of relief escaped her lips. She had found a way in. She continued to work on the yellow thread. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, she worked it free from the thread it was caught on. It was now a longer loop. She followed it with her fingers until she found where it was caught next. This time, it was wrapped around 2 other threads. The process began again. The gentle wiggling, the patient persuasion. She did not think about the entire knot. She did not think about the hours that were passing. Her entire world, her entire focus was on that one single strand of yellow wool. The sun moved across the sky, its light slanting through the large workshop windows. The morning turned into the afternoon. And then her hands were back in the basket, her eyes fixed on the threads. Her back began to ache from sitting on the hard floor. Her eyes burned from the strain of focusing. But she did not stop. The pile of tangled yarn was her ocean, and she was a patient fisherman, working a single line. One of the younger apprentices. She looked at the massive tangle, then at Helen's slow, painstaking work. "You will be here forever," the girl said, not unkindly. "Madame just gave you that so you would go away." Helen did not look up. "I have time," she said simply, her fingers still working the yellow thread. The girl watched for a moment longer, shook her head, and walked away. By the end of the day, when the light began to fail and the weavers began to slow their work, Helen had accomplished something. She had freed the entire strand of yellow wool. She carefully wound it into a neat little ball and placed it on the floor beside the basket. It was one small victory. A single perfect sphere of order rescued from the mountain of chaos. She looked at the basket. The tangle looked exactly the same. It was no smaller. Her one victory seemed impossibly tiny. A feeling of despair washed over her. The apprentice was right. She would be here forever. But then she looked at the little ball of yellow yarn. It was real. It was proof that it could be done. The task was not impossible. It was just very, very long. When Madame Isolde came to tell the weavers to stop for the day, she glanced over at the corner. She saw Helen, still sitting by the basket, her face pale with exhaustion, and she saw the small, neat ball of yellow yarn on the floor. Her expression did not change. She said nothing. She simply turned and left the workshop. Helen did not leave. The other women packed up their things and left, their voices a low murmur as they walked out into the evening streets. Soon, the great workshop was silent and empty, save for her. The room was filled with shadows. A boy came in to light a few of the oil lamps, casting a flickering golden glow on the silent looms. Helen kept working. She chose a new thread, a deep blue one, and began the process again. She worked until her eyes could no longer focus, until her fingers were raw and clumsy. She finally stood up, her body stiff and aching. She found her way back to the guest house through the dark, noisy streets of the city at night. She stumbled up the stairs to her tiny room and fell onto her bed, not even bothering to take off her dress. She slept a heavy, dreamless sleep. The next morning, she was back at the workshop before the other weavers arrived. She sat on the floor in her corner and began to work. The day passed just like the one before. A slow, patient battle with the tangled threads. By the end of the second day, she had a ball of blue yarn and a ball of green yarn to place beside the yellow one. 3 small victories. She arrived before anyone else. She left after everyone was gone. Her life shrank until it contained only 3 things: the guest house room, the walk to the workshop, and the basket of tangled yarn. The city outside ceased to exist for her. The other weavers stopped seeing her as a stranger. She became a quiet, constant fixture in the corner, a part of the workshop's furniture. Sometimes they would watch her, their expressions a mixture of pity and grudging respect. No one had ever shown such foolish, stubborn patience. On the 7th day, she pulled the last thread free. She placed it beside the others. On the floor next to the now empty basket was a rainbow of neatly wound balls and coils of yarn. Red, blue, green, yellow, purple, white, wool, silk, linen, and silver. Every single thread had been rescued. Order had been created from chaos. She looked at her work. She felt a deep, quiet satisfaction that was more powerful than any joy she had ever known. She had done it. She had passed the test. She did not have to wait long. Madame Isolde, who had been watching her from her desk for the past hour, stood up and walked over. She did not look at Helen. She looked down at the neat rows of colored yarn on the floor. She bent down and picked up the ball of blue silk, the one Helen had struggled with for almost a whole day. She ran the thread through her long, elegant fingers. She examined the coil of silver thread. Her face was impossible to read. She stood up and looked at Helen, who was still sitting on the floor, exhausted but expectant. "You have patient hands," Madame Isolde said. Her voice was quiet, a simple statement of fact. There was no praise, but for the first time, there was no dismissal either. There was respect. "You have a quiet mind. These are good things for a weaver." She paused, her pale gray eyes seeming to look right through Helen, into her very soul. "The floors need to be swept every morning," she said. "The looms need to be wiped clean of dust every evening. The bobbins need to be sorted. There is much work to be done that does not involve touching a thread." She looked around the great, silent workshop. "You may do this work, and while you do it, you will watch. You will listen, and you will learn." Tears of relief welled up in Helen's eyes, but she did not let them fall. She just nodded, unable to speak. "Go home and get some rest," Madame Isolde said, her voice a little softer now. "Your apprenticeship begins tomorrow." Helen had found her place. The journey had been long, the test had been hard, but she was here, she was inside. She was no longer a stranger at the door. She was an apprentice in the workshop of a master weaver. She was home. Chapter 6. Threads of Gold and Silver. Helen's days in the workshop of Madame Isolde fell into a new and demanding rhythm. A rhythm that had nothing to do with the sea and everything to do with the steady, relentless beat of the looms. Her first task every morning, before the sun had fully risen and before the other weavers arrived, was to sweep the great wooden floor. The workshop was a place that created dust. Tiny, almost invisible fibers of wool, cotton, and linen were constantly floating in the air, shed by the vast quantities of yarn that filled the room. By morning, a fine, soft, colorful layer of this dust covered every surface. Helen would take the heavy, bristled broom and begin at the back of the workshop, near Madame Isolde's silent desk. She would sweep with long, slow, careful strokes. She could not be careless. A clumsy movement could send a cloud of dust rising, settling on the precious yarns or on the delicate mechanisms of the looms. She learned to move with a quiet economy of motion, her body low to the ground, guiding the river of dust before her. It was not mindless work. As she swept, her eyes were open. She saw the grooves in the floorboards worn deep by generations of weavers' feet. She saw the faint, oily spots where a loom had been repaired. She was learning the geography of the workshop, its history written in the wood. They were like great, sleeping animals in the morning quiet. She touched them with a reverence that bordered on awe. She cleaned the smooth, polished beams, the intricate gears, the pedals on the floor. She learned the name of each part. The heddles, which were hundreds of thin wires or cords, each with a tiny eye through which a warp thread passed. The beater, the heavy bar that she had watched the weavers pull, with its comb-like reed that separated the threads. The warp beam at the back, where the unwoven threads were wound, and the cloth beam at the front, where the finished fabric was collected. She learned the looms not with her mind, but with her hands, through the simple act of cleaning them. When the other weavers arrived, their chatter would briefly fill the quiet space before the work began, and the steady clack-thud of the shuttles took over. Helen's tasks would change. She was the one who kept the workshop running smoothly. She sorted the bobbins, the small spools that held the weft threads, arranging them by color and material in a large cabinet. The cabinet was a library of color, a feast for the eyes. There were shades of red from the palest pink to the deepest crimson. There were blues that ranged from the color of a summer sky to the deep, dark blue of the midnight ocean. It was here that Helen began her true education. She would hold the bobbins, feel the different textures of the yarn. Wool was springy and warm. Cotton was soft and matte. Linen was crisp and cool. And silk, the most precious of all, was impossibly smooth, seeming to catch the light and hold it within the thread itself. She learned that the rich red color came from the ground-up bodies of a tiny insect, and that the deep blue came from a fermented plant. She would stir the steaming vats with a long wooden paddle, the colors swirling like magic potions. It was hot, heavy, smelly work. Her arms would ache, and her simple brown dress became permanently stained with splashes of color, a map of her labors. Time in the workshop was not measured in days or weeks, but in projects. A weaver might spend a month or more at her loom, working on a single bolt of cloth. Helen watched them all. She saw how they created simple, sturdy wool for merchants' coats. She saw how they wove fine, almost transparent linen for the shirts of wealthy men. And she saw the creation of the great tapestries, the masterpieces of the workshop. These were woven on the largest looms by the most experienced weavers, following a detailed drawing called a cartoon that was placed behind the warp threads. These tapestries told stories, with pictures of knights and ladies, of mythical beasts and beautiful gardens. She watched how a weaver would carefully select her colors, how she would blend different shades together to create the illusion of shadow and light. She watched the weaver's hands, the incredible speed and precision with which she would pass the shuttle and beat the thread. She watched their feet, dancing on the petals, changing the pattern of the warp. She did not ask questions. She just watched and listened and absorbed everything. The workshop was her school, and the rhythmic sounds of the looms were her teachers. Months passed. The seasons turned outside the workshop's large windows, but inside, the world remained the same. A world of thread and color, of hard work and deep concentration. Helen became a part of the workshop's rhythm. The other apprentices, who had at first been suspicious of the strange, silent girl from the coast, began to accept her. They saw her tireless work, her quiet dedication. They would sometimes offer her a small smile or a quiet word of greeting. She was no longer an outsider. It was the smallest loom in the workshop, an old one that was not used for commissions. "You have watched long enough," Madame Isolde said, her voice as crisp as ever. "It is time to see if your hands have learned anything more than how to hold a broom." Helen's heart leaped. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had dreamed of. Her hands trembled with a mixture of excitement and fear. Madame Isolde did not give her fine silk or bright colors, the kind used for practice or for making horse blankets. "The first lesson is the most important," Madame Isolde said. "You will learn to make a straight edge. You will learn to keep an even tension. You will weave a simple, plain cloth. You will not try to make a pattern. You will not try to be clever. You will just weave. You will do this until your cloth is perfect, until the edges are as straight as a ruled line, and the texture is as even as a calm sea." Helen had to take hundreds of individual threads and stretch them from the back beam to the front beam, keeping them all at the exact same tension. Then she had to pass each single thread through the tiny eye of a heddle. Her eyes strained, and her back ached from leaning over the loom. It took her 3 whole days. When she was finished, Madame Isolde came to inspect her work. The old weaver ran her hand over the sheet of warp threads. "Some are too loose," she said, pointing out flaws Helen could not even see. "Do it again." It was not until the 4th try, after more than a week of painstaking, frustrating work, that Madame Isolde gave a single sharp nod of approval. "It is adequate," she said, which from her was the highest praise. Then Helen began to weave. She sat on the bench, her feet reaching for the petals. Her first attempts were a disaster. The shuttle, which looked so effortless in the hands of the other weavers, was clumsy in hers. She would throw it too hard, and it would fly out of the loom and clatter onto the floor. or she would not throw it hard enough, and it would get stuck halfway. Her edges were not straight. They wobbled and curved, sometimes getting narrower, sometimes getting wider. Her tension was uneven. Some rows were packed too tightly, creating a hard ridge. Others were too loose, leaving small gaps in the cloth. The simple, plain cloth was a mess of her mistakes. She would not shout or scold. She would simply point out the flaws with the tip of her long, slender finger. Uneven. Look here. The tension is wrong. Your edge is failing. And every evening, Helen would have to unweave all the work she had done that day, pulling out the threads one by one, a painful process of erasing her failures. She wove and unwove the same piece of coarse wool cloth countless times. Frustration was a constant companion. Sometimes she would want to scream, to kick the loom, to give up, but she never did. She would close her eyes, take a deep breath, and remember the feel of the tangled yarn in her hands. She had conquered that. She could conquer this. She learned to feel the rhythm. She learned to listen to the loom. Her hands and feet began to work together, not as separate parts, but as a single system. The shuttle began to fly straight and true. Her beat became steady and even. Her edges, slowly, painfully, began to straighten out. One day, Madame Isolde came to her loom and inspected the few inches of cloth she had woven that morning. She ran her hand over it. She looked at the edge. She said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Continue." She did not tell her to unweave it. Helen felt a thrill of victory, so pure it almost made her dizzy. It was the first time her work had been allowed to remain. From that day on, her progress was faster. She finished the bolt of coarse wool cloth. It was not beautiful, but it was well made. The edges were straight. The texture was even. She had learned the first, most important lesson. Now Madame Isolde began to teach her about patterns. She started with the simplest ones, stripes and then checkerboards. Helen learned how to change colors, how to count the threads, how to follow a simple pattern. Then she moved on to more complex geometric shapes, like diamonds and zigzags. Each new pattern was a challenge, a new puzzle to be solved. Her mind, which had always been quiet and observant, was well suited to this work. She loved the logic of the patterns, the way the simple crossing of threads could create such variety. But she did not just copy the traditional patterns that Madame Isolde taught her. In the evenings, in her small room at the guest house, she would take out a piece of charcoal and practice drawing. She did not draw the geometric shapes from the looms. She drew the things she remembered from home. She drew the swirling pattern the water made as it eddied around a rock. She drew the graceful, curving shape of a gull's wing. She drew the perfect, intricate spiral of a seashell. These were the patterns that were written in her heart. One day, when she had become proficient at the traditional patterns, she gathered her courage. She showed Madame Isolde one of her drawings, the spiral of the seashell. "Could I try to weave this?" she asked, her voice quiet. Madame Isolde looked at the drawing for a long time. It was not a geometric pattern. It was flowing, organic, natural. It was not the kind of thing her workshop usually produced. "It is a difficult shape," she said. "The curves are hard to achieve on a grid of straight threads." "I would like to try," Helen said. Madame Isolde gave her a rare, small smile. "Very well," she said. "Let us see what your ocean memories can teach the loom." She gave Helen fine wool yarn in the colors of the beach, pale creams and sandy tans and soft, pearly grays. Helen went to work with a passion she had never felt before. This was not just a technical exercise. This was her own voice, her own story, being translated into thread. It was difficult. Madame Isolde was right. The curves were hard. She had to use special techniques, blending the colors carefully, to create the illusion of a smooth, flowing line. She wove and unwove sections many times until it was just right. The finished piece was only a small square of cloth, but it was unlike anything ever made in the workshop. The seashell seemed to glow on the fabric, its spiral so perfect it seemed you could pick it up. It had a sense of life, of nature, that the more formal patterns lacked. When she showed it to Madame Isolde, the old weaver was silent for a long time. She ran her fingers over the woven shell. "There is truth in this," she said finally, her voice soft. "It has the feel of the sea in it." From that day on, Helen's work changed. Madame Isolde encouraged her to develop her own style. She wove fabrics with the subtle, shifting colors of a sunrise over the water. She wove patterns that mimicked the texture of sand, of stone, of weathered wood. Her work was unique. It was quiet, beautiful, and deeply connected to the natural world she had come from. The other weavers would sometimes gather around her loom, admiring her strange and beautiful creations. Her reputation within the small world of the workshop grew. She was no longer just the quiet apprentice who swept the floors. She was Helen, the girl who wove the sea. One day, a very important visitor came to the workshop. He was a wealthy merchant named Lord Valerius, a man who bought the finest textiles for the noble houses of the city. He was a large man, dressed in dark velvets and furs, and he had a loud, booming voice. He was one of Madame Isolde's most important clients. He was looking for something special, a large wall hanging for the main hall of his new mansion. He had rejected all the traditional designs. He wanted something new, something no one had ever seen before. Madame Isolde, in a gesture of great trust, showed him some of Helen's small, experimental pieces. Lord Valerius looked at the seashell, at the sunrise pattern, at the piece that looked like shimmering water. His loud voice softened. "This is it," he said, his eyes wide. "This is the work of a true artist." "Who did this?" Madame Isolde called Helen forward. The great merchant looked down at the small, slender girl in the simple, dye-stained dress. He looked surprised. "You did this," he boomed. Helen nodded, her heart pounding. "I want you to make my wall hanging," he declared. "I want a piece as wide as that loom and as tall as a man. I want the ocean. I want a sunrise over the water. Can you do it?" It was the biggest, most important commission the workshop had received in years. All eyes turned to Helen. It was an incredible opportunity, but also an immense pressure. She looked at Madame Isolde, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Yes," Helen said, her voice clear and steady. "I can do it." The next few months were the most intense of Helen's life. She was given the largest loom in the workshop. She was given the finest yarns, shimmering silks, soft merino wools, and threads of real gold and silver. She spent days just planning, drawing the design, mixing the special dyes for the hundreds of colors she would need. Then the weaving began. It was a monumental task. She worked from before dawn until long after dusk. She lived and breathed the tapestry. It was her entire world. She wove the dark, deep blue of the night sea at the bottom. She wove the first faint hint of light on the horizon. She wove the brilliant pinks and oranges and golds of the rising sun, the colors exploding across the fabric. She used the silver threads to create the shimmering path of light on the water. She used the gold threads to create the dazzling brightness of the sun itself. It was more than a picture. She poured all of her love for her home, all of her memories of the sea, into the threads. The tapestry was alive with the sound of the waves, the smell of the salt, the cry of the gulls. When it was finally finished, and it was cut from the loom, the entire workshop fell silent. The tapestry was breathtaking. It was a masterpiece. It shimmered and glowed with a life of its own. It was not just a picture of a sunrise, it was the feeling of a sunrise. Lord Valerius was ecstatic. He paid Madame Isolde a sum of money that made even the old weaver's eyes widen, and according to the traditions of the workshop, a large portion of that money went to the weaver who had created the piece. That evening, Madame Isolde pressed a heavy purse into Helen's hand. It contained more gold coins than Helen had ever dreamed of. It was more money than her father could earn in 10 years of fishing. She had done it. She had fulfilled the promise of her journey. She was a weaver, a successful one. With her new wealth, she experienced a different side of the city. She bought herself a new dress, one of beautiful, soft green wool from her own workshop. She moved out of the tiny guest house room and into a small, clean apartment of her own, with 2 rooms and a window that looked out over the city's rooftops. She ate at a nice inn, where the food was served on clean plates and the wine was good. She went to a concert and heard music played on instruments she had never seen before. She enjoyed these things. They were pleasant, but a strange, hollow feeling began to grow in her heart. The city was full of wonders, but she was lonely. She had the respect of the weavers in the workshop, but they were her colleagues, not her close friends. She had no one to share her success with. No one who had known her before she was Helen the Weaver. She missed the easy, comfortable silences with her mother. She missed her father's gruff affection. She missed her brother's foolish, wonderful dreams. She would stand at her new window at night and look out at the 1,000 lights of the city. It was a beautiful sight, a sea of flickering lamps and torches. It was the city of 1,000 lights that Silas had described. She had found her place here. She had found success, but she realized, with a growing ache in her heart, that she had not found her home. Her success felt like a beautiful, intricate tapestry that she had woven, but it was hanging in an empty room. Her heart, she now knew, was not in this city of stone and light. It was in a small, quiet village by the sea, a place that smelled of salt and fish, a place where the main rhythm was not the clatter of the looms, but the slow, steady breathing of the ocean. Chapter 7. The Pull of the Ocean. The success Helen had dreamed of was now hers. It was a real, solid thing. It was the weight of the gold coins in her purse. It was the softness of the new green wool dress she wore, a dress that did not scratch her skin like the coarse homespun she had known her whole life. It was the 2 clean rooms of her apartment, a space that was all her own, a luxury she could not have imagined in the single crowded room of her family's cottage. It was the respectful nod she received from the other weavers in the workshop, and the way merchants would speak her name with a certain awe. She had done it. She had walked from the edge of the sea into the heart of the great city, and she had made a place for herself. She had taken her quiet patience and her memories of home, and she had woven them into something the world saw as beautiful and valuable. By every measure she could think of, she was a success. But a strange and hollow feeling had begun to grow within her, like a slow, cold tide rising in her heart. In the evenings, she would finish her work at the loom and walk back to her apartment through the bustling streets. She would buy her dinner from a cook shop, perhaps a piece of roasted chicken or a small meat pie. The food was rich and flavorful, full of spices and herbs she had never tasted before her journey. But as she ate it, alone in her quiet rooms, the taste would turn to ash in her mouth. It was just food. It was not the simple fish stew her mother made, a stew that tasted of the sea and the garden and the warmth of the family hearth. That stew was more than food. It was love. This was just a meal to fill her stomach. She would sit by her window, the window that looked out over a sea of rooftops and chimneys. At night, the view was spectacular. 1,000 lights flickered across the city, lamps in windows, torches in the streets, creating a man-made constellation that was beautiful and vast. It was the site Silas the merchant had promised, a city that never truly slept, that burned with its own light. She would look at it, and she would feel nothing but a profound and aching loneliness. Each light was a home, a room where a family was gathered, where friends were talking, where people were living their lives together. She was looking at 100,000 lives, and not one of them was connected to her. She was an observer, a ghost looking down on a world she was not truly a part of. The beautiful view only made her feel more alone. The sounds of the city, which had once been a terrifying but exciting wave of newness, now grated on her nerves. The constant rumble that came up through the floor, the endless clatter of wheels on stone, the distant shouts and arguments, it was all just noise now. It was a meaningless, chaotic noise that never stopped. It wore her down, scraping away at the edges of her peace. She found herself craving silence, not the artificial, muffled quiet of her apartment, but the deep, real silence of the coast on a calm night, a silence so profound you could hear the blood moving in your own ears, a silence that was filled only by the gentle sigh of the sea. She missed that sound with a physical ache. It was a sound that had rocked her to sleep her entire life, and without it, her sleep was shallow and restless. Even her work, the source of her success, began to feel different. She was still a skilled weaver. Her hands still knew the language of the loom, but the joy was fading. When she wove her tapestries of the ocean, she found that she had to reach further and further back into her memory. The images were becoming fainter, less clear. The memory of the salt spray on her face, the feeling of the cold wind, the precise color of the water at dawn, these things were like old, faded fabrics. She was weaving copies of memories, not the living truth. Her art came from the sea, and she was an artist slowly starving, cut off from her only source of nourishment. She was a plant trying to grow in a room with no windows. This hollow feeling grew day by day, a quiet, persistent sadness that she could not shake. She had everything she had thought she wanted, but it was not enough. She had money, but she had no one to share it with. She had respect, but she had no one who truly knew her. She had a beautiful apartment, but she did not have a home. She began to understand a deep and simple truth. A person could have the whole world, but if they were in the wrong place, they had nothing. And she knew with a certainty that was as clear and cold as the water in the bottom of the well, that she was in the wrong place. The city of Solara, with all its wonders and all its lights, was not her world. The turning point came on a gray, drizzly afternoon. The rain was not the clean, salt-laced rain of Port Blossom, but a dirty, sooty rain that made the stone streets slick and dark. Helen was at the workshop, trying to concentrate on a new design, but her mind was elsewhere. A boy came into the workshop, a skinny, wet boy who worked as a runner, delivering messages throughout the city. He was looking for someone. He was asking for the weaver from the sea. One of the other apprentices pointed towards Helen. The boy came to her loom. "You are the one?" he asked, wiping rain from his face with a wet sleeve. "I have a message for you, from a sailor at the South Dock." Helen's heart gave a sudden, hard jolt. A sailor, the docks. These were words from her old life. "What sailor?" she asked, her voice tight. "I do not know his name," the boy said. "An old man," he said. "He is from a village called Port Blossom. He said he has a letter for the daughter of Cale the fisherman." Port Blossom. Cale the fisherman. The words were like a physical blow. They knocked the air from her lungs. She had not heard those names spoken aloud in years. She stood up so quickly that the wooden bench scraped loudly on the floor. All the looms in the workshop fell silent. Every weaver turned to look at her. "Where?" she asked the boy. The boy gave her directions to the South Dock, to a specific tavern where the sailor was waiting. Helen did not wait. She did not ask permission from Madame Isolde. She grabbed her cloak, threw a few coins to the boy, and ran from the workshop. She ran through the drizzling rain, her feet slipping on the wet stones. She did not care. The city was a blur around her. The noise, the people, they were nothing. All she could think of was the letter. The South Dock was a part of the city she had never seen. It was a chaotic, smelly, and dangerous place, full of rough-looking sailors from all over the world. But it smelled of the sea. It was a dirty, polluted sea, the water full of trash and grime, but it was the sea. The smell of salt and tar and wet rope was a scent that spoke directly to her soul. It was a piece of home in the middle of this alien city. She found the tavern. It was a dark, noisy place, full of men shouting in languages she did not understand. She stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the crowd. In a dark corner, she saw him. An old man, his face as wrinkled and brown as a piece of driftwood, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of hauling ropes. He looked like he could have been from her village. He saw her and raised a hand. She walked towards him, her heart pounding in her chest. "You have a letter for me?" she asked. The old sailor nodded. He reached into the pocket of his rough wool coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was not clean, white paper like the kind used in the city. It was rough, brownish paper, stained with salt and water. It was folded clumsily. He held it out to her. Helen took it. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The writing inside was large and clumsy, the letters struggling to form words. It was Finn's handwriting. She remembered teaching him how to write his letters, his small hand gripping the piece of charcoal so tightly. She began to read. The letter was short. There were no pleasant greetings. It was as direct and as blunt as a rock. "The fish are not coming this season. The nets are empty most days. The other boats are the same. Old Man Hemlock says the currents have changed. Father's boat is bold. The wood is tired. He is tired too. His cough is bad in the cold. He works too hard. She does not sleep. Come home, Finn." That was all. Come home. Helen read the letter once, then she read it again and again. The noisy tavern faded away. The city of Solara dissolved around her. All she could see were the words on the rough paper. Each word was a picture. The empty nets, dripping with cold, useless seawater. Her father's old boat, the seams leaking, the wood groaning with every wave. Her father's face, thinner now, his body stooped with a weariness that went deeper than a single day's work. His cough, a harsh, rattling sound in the small, quiet cottage. Her mother's face, her brow furrowed with a constant, silent worry. And Finn, no longer a little boy dreaming of adventure, but a young man burdened with the cares of his family. A wave of guilt and shame, so powerful it made her physically sick, washed over her. She had been living in her fine apartment, wearing her soft wool dress, eating her rich food, while her family was suffering, while her father was growing weaker, fighting the sea in a failing boat, while her mother was lying awake at night, sick with worry. She had been so lost in her own hollow success, her own selfish loneliness, that she had forgotten them. She had not forgotten to love them, but she had forgotten what their lives were truly like. She had let the distance become too great. The old sailor was watching her, his expression kind. "The boy is a good lad," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He gave me this to give to you." He held out a small, lumpy object wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. Helen took it. She unwrapped it. It was a single, perfect white seashell, the kind that was rare on their beach, the kind Finn would search for hours. It was a piece of home, a piece of his heart. She closed her fingers around the shell. The decision was not even a decision. It was a certainty. It was the only possible thing in the world. "Thank you," she said to the sailor, her voice choked with emotion. "Tell me, when does your ship sail?" "With the morning tide," he said. "Will you take a passenger?" she asked. He looked at her fine cloak, at the clear desperation in her eyes. "If she has the coin," he said gently. "I have the coin," she said. She left the tavern and walked back through the city. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a flat, hopeless gray. The city seemed different to her now. It was no longer her home, not even a temporary one. It was a foreign place, a place that had kept her from her family. It was an obstacle to be overcome. Her mind was clear and sharp. The hollow feeling was gone, replaced by a fierce, burning sense of purpose. She went first to her apartment. She did not look at her nice things. She went to the wooden chest and took out the pouch with her father's savings and the heavier purse with her own earnings. This money was not for her anymore. It was for a new boat. It was for medicine. It was for a future. She took her small original bundle, the one she had arrived with, and placed the wooden gull inside it. That was all she would take from this place. The fine dress, the comfortable furniture, they meant nothing to her. She walked back to the workshop. It was late, and most of the weavers had already left, but a single lamp was still burning at the back. Madame Isolde was at her desk, working on her account books. She looked up as Helen entered. She saw Helen's face, and she knew. The wise old weaver had seen this coming. She had seen the growing sadness in Helen's eyes. "You are leaving," Madame Isolde said. It was not a question. "Yes," Helen replied. "My family needs me." She held out Finn's letter. Madame Isolde did not read it. She did not need to. "I know," she said. "An artist cannot create from a memory alone. You need to be near your ocean. Your best work comes from your heart, and your heart has not been here for a long time." She stood up and walked over to Helen. She placed a hand on Helen's shoulder. It was the first time the old weaver had ever touched her. The gesture was full of a surprising warmth. "You have been my best apprentice," Madame Isolde said, her voice softer than Helen had ever heard it. "You have a rare gift. Do not let it die in this city of stone." She turned and went to a large, locked cabinet. She opened it with a small, intricate key. From inside, she took two things. The first was a long, flat box. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a set of weaver's tools. They were not made of wood or bone. They were made of polished steel and smooth, dark hardwood. There were shuttles of different sizes, perfectly balanced. There were fine metal combs and hooks for intricate work. It was a set of tools for a master weaver. "A great artist needs great tools," Madame Isolde said, handing the box to Helen. The second item was a large, leather-bound book. It was heavy. Helen took it. She opened it. The pages were filled with incredibly complex patterns and designs, hand-drawn with exquisite detail. There were notes in the margins, explaining difficult techniques. It was Madame Isolde's personal book of patterns, the accumulated knowledge of her entire lifetime. "The world is full of patterns," Madame Isolde said. "But knowledge of the craft is a valuable thing. Take it, use it. Add your own patterns to its pages." Tears streamed down Helen's face now, tears of gratitude. "I cannot thank you enough," she whispered. "Your work has been thanks enough," Madame Isolde replied. "You brought the sea into my workshop. Now go home. Go back to your source." The next morning, before the sun rose, Helen was a whirlwind of purposeful activity. She did not go to the docks yet. She had things to do. She went first to a merchant who dealt in fine art and textiles, the same man who had sold her great tapestry for Lord Valeris. She had a few smaller pieces in her apartment, pieces she had woven for herself. She sold them all to him. He was sad to see her go, but he paid her a fair price, adding another heavy bag of coins to her growing fortune. With this money, she did not go shopping for herself. She went shopping for her family. Her purpose was so clear, her mind so focused, that she navigated the sprawling markets of the city with an efficiency that would have been impossible for her just a few weeks earlier. The noise and the crowds were no longer a confusing maze. They were just a resource to be used. For her father, she bought a coil of the finest rope she could find, rope treated with special oils to resist the rot of the salt water. She bought him a long, heavy cloak made of lanolin-rich wool, a cloak that was so tightly woven it would be almost completely waterproof to keep him warm and dry during the cold days at sea. She bought a set of fine steel tools for woodworking, sharp chisels, a small, powerful hand drill, and a fine-toothed saw, things that would make repairing the old boat or building a new one much easier. For her mother, she bought things to ease her endless work, a set of shining steel needles of all sizes that would not break or rust, 3 new kitchen knives, their blades so sharp they could slice a vegetable with a single touch. She bought small sealed packets of seeds for the hardy, fast-growing vegetables she had seen in the city's markets, things that would grow even in the poor, salty soil of their garden. She also bought a large sack of the finest flour and a packet of the baker's yeast, so her mother could make light, soft bread instead of the hard, flat cakes they usually ate. For Finn, she bought the things a young man dreaming of the sea would want. A fine, sharp knife with a handle carved from bone, perfect for carving wood or cutting rope. A small, beautiful compass, its needle floating in a brass case, so he would never lose his way. And she bought him a book, a simple one filled not with words, but with hand-drawn maps of the coastlines, showing the currents and the hidden rocks. Finally, she bought things for her plan, her new vision. She went back to the weaver's district. She did not buy a giant, heavy loom like the ones in the workshop. She bought a smaller, more modern one that was cleverly designed to be taken apart and reassembled. It was still heavy, but it was portable. She spent a large sum of her money on yarn. She did not buy a rainbow of exotic colors. She bought large quantities of strong, high-quality wool and linen and cotton in simple, natural colors: cream, gray, brown, and a deep, beautiful blue. She bought books that explained the chemistry of dyes, books that showed diagrams of different weaving techniques, books that contained the city's knowledge. She had all these things delivered to the South Dock, to the ship of the old sailor from Port Blossom. It was a small, sturdy-looking merchant vessel, not a grand ship, but it looked reliable. She paid the captain for her passage and for the transport of her precious cargo. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, watery light over the city, Helen stood on the deck of the ship. She wore her old, familiar brown wool dress. Her hair was tied back simply. In her hands, she held her small, original bundle. She was the same person who had arrived in the city years ago, and yet she was completely different. She had arrived as a frightened girl with a vague dream. She was leaving as a confident woman with a concrete plan. The sailors cast off the ropes. The ship slowly pulled away from the dock. The grimy, chaotic city of Solara began to recede. She looked at the massive stone walls, the towering buildings, the thousand smoking chimneys. It was not a place of wonder to her anymore. It was not a place of loneliness either. It was just a place where she had learned, a place where she had grown, a place she had passed through on her journey. She felt no sadness at leaving it. She felt only a great, soaring sense of release, of rightness. She did not look back. Her eyes were fixed on the open water ahead, on the path that would lead her home. She was not running away from the city. She was running towards her family. She was running towards her true life, and she was not returning empty-handed. She was returning with a fortune, with knowledge, and with a plan to save not just her family, but the very village she had once been so desperate to escape. Chapter 8. The Return to Port Blossom. The journey home was the reverse of the journey out, but Helen saw the world through new eyes. The sea, which on her voyage to Solara had been a familiar but fading backdrop, was now the entire world. The ship was a small, self-contained universe of wood and rope, a tiny island of human endeavor floating on the vast, indifferent blue of the ocean. For the first few days, the water was the dirty, cluttered brown of the city's influence. But as they sailed further from the coast, the water began to change. It became cleaner, clearer. It turned from brown to a murky green, and then to a deep, brilliant blue that mirrored the sky above. The air lost its smoky, heavy thickness and became sharp, clean, and filled with the pure, unmistakable taste of salt. Helen would stand at the ship's rail for hours, her face turned into the wind, just breathing. It felt like she was drinking, quenching a thirst she hadn't even realized was parching her soul. The ship followed the coastline, always keeping the land in sight. The jagged, man-made skyline of the city gave way to the flat, tamed patchwork of the farmlands. The farmlands, in turn, dissolved into the deep, dark green of the great forest. Helen remembered her fear of the forest on her first journey, the feeling of being trapped under its dark canopy. Now, looking at it from the sea, it was just a beautiful, mysterious line of trees, a protective wall between the sea and the inland world. After the forest came the rolling green hills, empty and vast under the open sky. She recognized the shapes of the hills, the way they curved down to meet the rocky shore. She was getting closer. A deep, quiet excitement began to build inside her, a feeling like a warm, rising tide. The sailors on the ship were rough men, their hands calloused and their faces burned by the sun and wind. They were men of few words, much like the fishermen of her own village. They saw her, a lone woman on their ship, dressed in a simple dress, her hands showing the signs of hard work. They left her alone, respecting her quiet solitude. She was not a fine lady from the city, and she was not one of them. She was something in between, and they gave her her space. The old captain, the man who had brought her the letter, would sometimes nod to her as he passed, a small gesture of kindness. He knew her story, and he seemed to approve. Unlike her slow, plodding journey by cart, the journey by sea was swift. The wind was with them, filling the great canvas sails and pushing the ship steadily forward. The sounds were the sounds of her childhood, the constant, gentle creak of the ship's timbers, the snap of the sails as they caught a gust of wind, the rhythmic slap of the water against the hull, and above it all, the high, lonely cry of the gulls, who had begun to follow the ship. They were a sign that she was truly back in their territory, back in the world of the coast. One afternoon, the old captain pointed to the shore. "See there," he said, his voice a low rumble against the wind. "That high cliff, your village is just beyond it. We will be there by sunset." Helen's heart began to beat a fast, heavy rhythm. The high cliff, she knew it well. It was the cliff where the boys would dare each other to climb, the cliff where the sheep grazed. Her eyes stayed fixed on that point of land as the ship sailed closer. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink and gold. The sea turned from blue to a shimmering silver. It was a sight she had woven into her great tapestry, a sight she knew by heart. But seeing it in person, feeling the cool evening air on her skin, smelling the salt and the seaweed, was 1,000 times more real, more powerful than any memory. The ship rounded the point of the high cliff, and there it was, Port Blossom. It was just as she remembered it, and yet it was completely different. It was smaller than she recalled. The years in the vast city had changed her sense of scale. The cluster of stone and wood cottages looked like a handful of pebbles tossed on the shore. The little harbor, with its protective stone wall, seemed tiny. The whole village was nestled into the curve of the bay, looking fragile and small against the immense backdrop of the sea and the sky. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over her. This was her place. These were her people. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney of each cottage, a sign of the evening fires being lit. The fishing boats, her father's among them, were already back from their day's work, moored safely in the harbor. The whole village seemed quiet. From the ship, she could see small figures moving on the shore. People, her people. As the ship sailed closer, a cry went up from the shore. Someone had seen them. A ship of this size was a rare sight in their small harbor. People began to gather on the stone jetty, their figures small and dark against the bright water. The ship could not enter the shallow harbor. The captain gave the order to drop anchor a little way out in the bay. The heavy anchor chain rattled loudly in the quiet evening air, and the ship came to a slow, gentle stop. A small boat was lowered from the ship's side. 2 sailors began to row it towards the shore. Helen climbed down the rope ladder, her movements sure and steady. She was no longer a girl who was afraid of heights. She sat in the small boat, her small bundle on her lap, her eyes fixed on the growing crowd on the jetty. She could begin to make out faces. She saw Mira, the baker, her arms dusted with flour. She saw old man Hemlock, standing tall, leaning on his cane. She saw children she did not recognize, and older children who had been toddlers when she left. And then she saw them, standing at the front of the crowd. Her family. Marin was there, her hand to her mouth, her face pale, just as it had been the day she left. But she was older. There were more gray streaks in her hair, more lines around her eyes. Cale stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. He looked smaller, his broad shoulders stooped with a weariness that cut Helen to the heart. He was thinner, and his face was a mask of disbelief and hope. And beside him stood Finn. He was not a boy anymore. He was a tall young man, almost as tall as his father. His face was thin and serious, the joyful, restless energy of his childhood replaced by the heavy look of a man who carried too many worries. The small boat scraped against the stone steps of the jetty. Helen stood up. For a moment, no one moved. The whole village was silent, watching. Then, Finn seemed to break out of his trance. "Helen," he whispered, his voice cracking, and then he was scrambling down the steps, splashing into the shallow water, and he was hugging her, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe. She hugged him back, burying her face in his shoulder, the familiar smell of him, of salt and wood smoke, filling her senses. Then her parents were there, and they were all clinging to each other, a small knot of a family, reunited. There were no grand words, no speeches. There were only tears. Tears of relief, of joy, of years of stored up love and worry. Kel's rough hand touched her hair, his touch clumsy but incredibly gentle. Moran held her face in her hands, her thumbs stroking her cheeks as if to make sure she was real. The villagers watched from a respectful distance, their faces soft with a shared happiness. A child of their village had come home. That evening, their small cottage was filled to bursting. It was filled with the things Helen had brought, the sacks and barrels and boxes that the sailors from the ship ferried to the shore in their small boat, load after load. And it was filled with people. The whole village seemed to squeeze into the tiny room. They came to see Helen, to welcome her home. But they also came to stare wide-eyed at the mountain of goods she had brought with her. They had never seen such things. The coils of fine, new rope, the shining steel tools, the sacks of white flour. It was a treasure beyond their wildest dreams. Helen did not act like a grand lady from the city. She was just Helen, quiet and gentle. She gave Myra the baker the sack of flour and the packet of yeast, and the woman wept with gratitude. She gave the blacksmith the fine steel hand drill, and the strong man's eyes glistened. She was not just giving them things, she was giving them hope. She was a sign that the world was bigger and more full of possibility than they had ever known. But the gifts for her family were the most important. She watched as her father ran his hand over the heavy, waterproof cloak, his fisherman's eyes assessing the quality of the wool. He said nothing, but his face was filled with a deep, quiet pride. She saw Finn's eyes light up with a spark of their old fire as he held the new knife, testing its sharp edge, and as he opened the small, beautiful compass, watching the needle swing to the north. And she saw the look on her mother's face as she held the new, sharp kitchen knives, a look of pure, simple relief at the thought of her daily work being made a little easier. The greatest shock came when Helen took out the heavy leather pouches of coins and poured them onto the simple wooden table. The gold and silver coins cascaded out, a river of light in the dim firelight. The entire cottage fell silent. The villagers stared, their mouths open. It was more money than any of them had ever seen in one place. It was more money than the entire village possessed. This is for a new boat, a strong one, and for nets that will not tear, and for medicine, and for food for the winter. Cale looked at the mountain of coins, and then he looked at his daughter. He saw the quiet confidence in her eyes, the strength she had brought back with her. He did not see a little girl who had run away to chase a foolish dream. He saw a woman who had gone out into the world and conquered it, and who had brought her victory home to share. He put his arm around her, and this time, he was the one who leaned on her. The next day, Helen's real work began. She did not just hand out money. She had a plan, a vision that had formed in the long days on the ship, a vision of how to change the future of her village. She did not start with weaving. She started with the sea. She went with her father and brother to the harbor to look at the old boat, the Sea Serpent. It was in even worse shape than she had imagined. The wood was soft and rotten in places. The single sail was a patchwork of patches. It was a miracle it was still floating. "We will not repair it," she declared. "We will build a new one, a better one." Cale looked at her, his eyes doubtful. "I am too old to build a new boat," he said, his voice heavy with weariness. "You will not build it alone," she said. She turned to the other fishermen who had gathered around, their faces grim. Their own boats were not much better. The whole fleet was old and tired. "We will all build it together, and not just one. We will build new boats for anyone who needs one. We have the money for the wood. We have the tools. We just need the hands." It was a radical idea. In Port Blossom, each family looked after its own boat. They helped each other when they could, but this was different. This was a community project. There was hesitation at first, but the sight of the gold coins and the quiet, unshakable confidence of this young woman who had come back from the city was a powerful force. The men agreed. Helen used her city knowledge. She had seen the barges on the river in Solara, and she had talked to the boatmen. She had learned about new ways of building, about different designs for hulls that were faster and more stable. She drew the plans in the sand of the beach, and the fishermen, who understood the language of boats better than anyone, gathered around, nodding, making suggestions, improving her designs. A new energy sparked through the village. The men who had been sunk in a quiet despair over the poor fishing were now filled with purpose. The men of the village traveled into the forest and, with Helen's gold, bought the finest, strongest lumber. The sound of saws and hammers filled the air of Port Blossom from dawn till dusk. They worked together, Kel's experience and the other fishermen's skill combining with Helen's new knowledge. They built a new kind of boat, one with a sleeker hull for speed and a wider beam for stability in rough water. They gave it to masts instead of one, with new sails made of strong, city-bought canvas. It was a boat that could sail further and faster and safer than any boat the village had ever known. While the men worked on the boats, Helen turned her attention to the women. She cleared out an old, unused shed that had once been used for salting fish. It was a dark, smelly place. She and her mother and a few other women scrubbed it clean from top to bottom. They let the sea breeze blow through it for days until the smell of old fish was gone. They painted the inside with whitewash, making it bright and clean. Then, with Finn's help, she assembled the loom she had brought from the city. It was a beautiful, complex machine of smooth wood and clever gears. The women of the village gathered around, their eyes wide with wonder. It looked like a magical device. Marin touched it gently. "You learned to use this?" she asked, her voice full of awe. "I learned," Helen said, "and now I will teach you." And so began the second part of her plan. In the new, clean workshop, she set up her loom and she began to teach. She started with her mother. Marin's hands, though rough from a lifetime of hard work, were nimble and patient. She had been mending and spinning her whole life. She learned quickly. Helen taught her the first, most important lesson: how to make a straight edge, how to keep an even tension. She did not give her mother coarse wool. She gave her soft, clean cotton. Then, she invited the other women of the village to learn. At first, they were hesitant. They had their own work to do, their gardens to tend, their children to care for. But Helen made them an offer. For every hour they spent learning to weave, she would pay them a small wage from her own purse. It was not much, but it was more than they could earn any other way. Curiosity and the promise of a few extra coins brought them to the workshop. Helen was a patient teacher. She remembered Madame Isolde's stern lessons, but her own style was gentler. She never scolded. She only encouraged. She showed them how to thread the loom, how to work the petals, how to send the shuttle flying. Many of them were clumsy at first, but they were women who had worked with their hands their whole lives. They learned. She did not teach them to make the complex tapestries she had made in the city. She taught them to make practical, beautiful things. They wove warm, soft blankets from the high-quality wool she had bought. They wove bolts of sturdy, smooth linen and cotton cloth, perfect for making clothes. And she taught them her own unique patterns, the patterns of the sea. They wove blankets with the pattern of gentle waves. They wove cloth with the subtle colors of the sand and the shells. They were creating something new, something that was uniquely Port Blossom. Soon the workshop was a hive of activity. The rhythmic clack-thud of a single loom was joined by another, and then another, as Helen bought more looms with her money. The sound of the looms became a new part of the village's daily song, a counterpoint to the sound of the hammers and the saws from the harbor. The day came when the first new fishing boat was finished. It was a beautiful, powerful vessel. They named it the Sunrise in honor of Helen's great tapestry. Kale and Finn were to be its captains. The whole village gathered for the launching. The new boat slid into the water and floated perfectly. A proud and beautiful thing. A great cheer went up from the crowd. It was a cheer of triumph, of a community that had worked together and created something wonderful. The Sunrise went out on its first fishing trip, and it returned laden with fish. The new design allowed it to travel further out, to the deeper waters where the fish were still plentiful. The new nets, made from the strong city-bought twine, did not break. That night, the entire village feasted. The despair of the bad season was broken. There was hope again. A few months later, Silas the merchant made his yearly visit to Port Blossom. He rolled into the village in his dusty cart, and he stopped and stared in amazement. The village was transformed. He saw the new boats in the harbor. He heard the sound of hammers as a third new boat was being built. He heard the rhythmic clatter of the looms coming from the clean, whitewashed shed. Helen greeted him, not as a shy girl, but as the confident leader of her community. She showed him the work of her new weaving workshop. She showed him the bolts of fine cloth, the soft, warm blankets, all woven with the unique patterns of the sea. Silas was a merchant. He saw not just beauty, but value. He ran his hands over the cloth. "This is excellent work," he said, his eyes sharp. "The quality is as good as some of the city workshops, and these designs, they are unique. There is nothing like this in Solara." He looked at Helen, a new respect in his eyes. "I will buy all of it," he declared, "and I will bring you orders for more, much more." And so, the final piece of Helen's plan fell into place. Port Blossom was no longer a poor village, dependent on the luck of the fishing season. It now had two strong legs to stand on. The sea, with its new fleet of strong boats, would provide for them, and the looms, with their connection to the city markets, would provide a second, steady source of income, one that was not dependent on the wind or the tides. The women of the village, who had always worked hard but had never earned their own money, were now skilled artisans, their work valued and sought after. The final scene does not end with a great event, but with a quiet moment of peace. Helen is sitting on the porch of her family's cottage. It is evening. The sun is setting, painting the sky with familiar, beautiful colors. She is not a wealthy weaver in the city. She is not a lonely girl dreaming of escape. She is just Helen at home. From the harbor, she can hear the quiet sounds of the fishing boats, safe and secure. From the shed down the path, she can hear the gentle, rhythmic clatter of the looms, the sound of the women of her village, working, creating, earning their own way. And beyond it all, she can hear the eternal, soothing sound of the waves on the shore. She has brought the two worlds together, the knowledge of the city and the heart of the village,